The Duchess stood at the cliff's edge, staring at the empty harbor where her husband's ship should have been. But Cedric wasn't coming home for their anniversary. He was in another city, in another woman's bed, making promises that weren't his to give. They thought silence would break her. They were wrong. What happened next didn't just destroy a marriage, it reshaped an entire coastline. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The salt wind cut across Morelle's face like a blade she'd grown accustomed to ignoring. 7 years on these cliffs had taught her that the ocean didn't care about your feelings. It just kept moving, kept crashing, kept eroding everything that wasn't strong enough to stand against it. She pulled her cloak tighter, not because she was cold, but because the fabric gave her something to hold on to that wasn't rage. "Your Grace, the delegation from Harmont has arrived early." Isla's voice came from behind her, careful and measured. Her handmaid had perfected that tone over the years, concerned without being pitying, present without being intrusive. Morelle didn't turn around. "How many?" 12. Oh, they brought gifts. For the anniversary celebration. "Yes, Your Grace." The anniversary. Morelle almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat before it could escape. 15 years married to Cedric Mallory, Duke of Coastmarch. 15 years of managing his territories while he managed his appetites. The first few years she'd believed the excuses, the extended hunting trips, the necessary diplomatic missions, the sudden illnesses that required recuperation in warmer climates. By year 5, she'd stopped asking questions. By year 7, she'd stopped expecting him home at all. "Tell them I'll receive them in an hour," Morelle said. "And Isla, make sure the kitchens prepare something impressive. If I'm going to sit through condolences disguised as congratulations, I want the wine strong and the food distracting." "They're not all—" "They know," Morelle interrupted, finally turning to face her handmaid. Isla was young, barely 20, with the kind of optimism that came from not yet understanding how the world actually worked. "Everyone knows." Cedric made sure of that when he decided to parade her through Silverton instead of coming home. Isla's expression shifted. Sympathy mixed with something that might have been anger on Morelle's behalf. "Lady Verea is—" "Don't—" Morelle raised a hand. "Don't say her name like it's a curse. She's just a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. I can't blame her for that." She paused, looking back at the empty harbor. "I blame him for being the kind of opportunity she could take." The truth was more complicated than that, but Morelle had learned that simple truths were easier for people to swallow. Verea Santon wasn't just some ambitious social climber. She was smart, connected, and ruthless in ways that made Morelle almost respect her. Almost. The woman had positioned herself perfectly, slipping into the gap between Cedric's ego and his actual competence like water finding a crack in stone. And now everyone was watching to see if the Duchess would shatter. Morelle walked back toward the fortress, her boots clicking against the stone path that wound up from the cliffs. The Coastmarch stronghold wasn't beautiful. It was functional, built to withstand storms and sieges, with thick walls and narrow windows that made the interior perpetually dim. Cedric had always hated it here. Too cold, he'd said. Too isolated. Too much like actual work. But Morelle had fallen in love with it almost immediately. Not the building itself, but what it represented. A territory that mattered, that controlled trade routes and fishing rights, and access to deep-water ports that could make or break kingdoms. Cedric had inherited the title and the land. Morelle had inherited the actual responsibility. The Great Hall was already being prepared when she entered. Servants moved efficiently through the space, setting tables, arranging flowers, creating the illusion of celebration. Morelle felt a twist of something like guilt watching them. These people knew the Duke wouldn't be here. They knew why. But they were going through the motions anyway because that's what survival looked like. Doing your job even when everything around you was falling apart. "Your Grace." Thomas appeared from the side entrance, his face flushed from climbing the stairs too quickly. Her steward was 50-something, competent to the point of being indispensable, and one of the few people in the household who didn't treat her like fragile glass. "We've received word from Silverton." Morelle stopped walking. "Official or gossip?" "Both." Thomas pulled out a folded letter, and Morelle recognized the seal immediately, Cedric's personal mark, not the ducal one. That told her everything she needed to know about how seriously he was taking this. She took the letter but didn't open it. What's the gossip version? Thomas hesitated, which meant it was worse than she'd expected. The Duke and Lady Verea hosted a banquet last night at the Whitehall estate. 300 guests. She wore Duchess colors. The anger that flared in Morel's chest was hot and immediate, but she'd learned to channel it years ago. Fury without strategy was just noise. What else? She's telling people you've withdrawn from public life due to fragility of spirit. Fragility of spirit. Morel repeated the words slowly, tasting the poison in them. It was perfect, actually, just ambiguous enough to sound sympathetic while implying weakness, instability, unsuitability for power. Clever. Your Grace. It is clever, Thomas. Give credit where it's due. Morel finally broke the seal and scanned the letter. Cedric's handwriting was as careless as everything else about him. Rushed, barely legible, the words of a man who'd already moved on. He apologized for his absence. He hoped she understood. He would return when circumstances allowed. And then, buried in the middle paragraph like a casual afterthought, Verea has been invaluable in managing certain delicate negotiations. I trust you appreciate the necessity of maintaining appearances during this sensitive time. Maintaining appearances. Morel wanted to laugh again, and this time she almost did. He's not coming, she said flatly. Thomas nodded. No, Your Grace. Not tomorrow, not next week. He's establishing her as an alternative center of power, and he's using my supposed retreat as justification. She folded the letter carefully, precisely, giving her hand something to do. How many people know about the banquet? By now, everyone who matters. Messengers have been riding hard since dawn. Good. Morel's mind was already moving, already calculating. Send word to Admiral Cortez, Lord Brennan, and the Harmont delegation. Tell them I'm calling an emergency session of the Coastal Trade Council. Tomorrow, noon. Thomas blinked. The council hasn't convened in 3 years, Your Grace. The Duke isn't here, Morel interrupted. And the council exists independent of his whims, even if he's forgotten that. The charter is clear. Any duchy representative can call a session if regional stability is threatened. And you're arguing that his absence constitutes a threat? I'm arguing that pirates don't take holidays just because the Duke is distracted. Morel started walking again, her pace quickening. We've had 4 raids in the last 2 months, Thomas. 4. Brennan lost an entire merchant convoy last week, and we still don't know if it was organized crime or something worse. The fishing guilds are threatening to withhold their tariff payments until we provide better naval protection. The northern lighthouse keepers are reporting unusual activity, ships that don't respond to signals, movements that don't match any registered routes. These aren't problems that wait for marital drama to resolve itself. She could see understanding dawning in Thomas's expression. You're using the council as leverage. I'm using the council as a council, Morel corrected. That's literally what it's for. But if Cedric happens to notice that I'm consolidating relationships with every major power player on the coast while he's busy playing house with his mistress, well, that's just a fortunate side effect. Thomas actually smiled, a small, tight expression that suggested approval. I'll send the messages immediately. Should I prepare quarters for extended delegations? Yes, and Thomas, make sure word reaches Silverton, quickly. You want the Duke to know you're convening the council? I want Verea to know, Morel said. She's the one who actually pays attention. Commit. The Harmont delegation arrived exactly on time, which told Morel they'd been expecting something. Lord Edward Harmont himself led the group, a weathered man in his 60s with eyes that missed nothing. He'd been trading up and down the coast since before Morel was born, and his network of contacts was legendary. Duchess. He bowed with genuine respect, not the performative courtesy she'd grown used to. My condolences on the Duke's absence. Are they condolences or congratulations, Edouard? Morel gestured for him to sit. They were in her private receiving room, smaller and warmer than the great hall, with windows that actually let in light. I can never tell the difference anymore, Edouard laughed, a rough sound that suggested too many years of sea air and pipe smoke. Bit of both, if I'm honest. Cedric's a fool, but that's hardly news. What matters is whether you're planning to do anything about it. Morel appreciated his directness. The Coastal Trade Council meets tomorrow. I trust you'll attend? Wouldn't miss it. Edouard leaned forward slightly. Word is you're gathering everyone who actually keeps this coast running. That's a hell of a move, Morel. Cedric won't like it. Cedric doesn't like anything that requires him to focus for more than 10 minutes. She poured them both wine. Good stuff. Imported from the southern vineyards, not the swill they usually served at official functions. But this isn't about him. We've got real problems, Edward. The kind that don't care about scandal or succession or who's sleeping where. The pirates. Among other things. Morel sipped her wine. What have you heard? Edward's expression shifted, becoming more serious. More than I like. The raids aren't random. They're too coordinated, too well informed. Someone's feeding them intelligence about shipping schedules, cargo manifests, route changes. And the targets aren't typical either. They're not just going after valuable goods. They're disrupting specific trade relationships, creating bottlenecks in specific supply chains. Economic warfare. That's what it looks like to me. But I can't figure out the endgame. If someone wanted to destabilize the coast, there are more direct ways to do it. Morel had been thinking about this for weeks, ever since the pattern became clear. What if the point isn't destabilization? What if it's consolidation? Edward stared at her. You think someone's trying to corner the market? I think someone's trying to make themselves indispensable, create enough chaos that people start looking for a strong hand to restore order. Then position yourself as that hand. She set down her wine glass. Tell me, Edward, who's been offering the most generous terms to merchants who've lost cargo recently? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. Verea Santon has been very helpful, extending lines of credit, arranging alternative shipping routes, connecting people with new trading partners. She's built quite a reputation as a problem solver. I bet she has. Morel stood, walking to the window that overlooked the harbor. 3 ships were docked below, their sails furled, crews visible as tiny figures moving across the decks. And how many of those problem-solving solutions just happen to route through territories or businesses she has connections to? Most of them. Edward's voice was flat now, the pieces clicking into place. You think she's behind the raids? I think she's benefiting from them in very specific ways. Whether she's orchestrating them or just capitalizing on convenient chaos. Either way, she's building an alternative power structure that makes her valuable and makes coastal stability dependent on her goodwill. Morel turned back to face him, and she's doing it while everyone's distracted watching my marriage fall apart. Edward was quiet for a long moment, then, that's ambitious. That's brilliant, Morel corrected. If I wasn't the target, I'd be impressed. She's using Cedric's name and position while building her own network, positioning herself as the competent partner, while I'm supposedly too delicate to manage my own territories. When the time comes, she won't need him anymore. She'll have her own base of support. And what are you going to do about it? Morel smiled. Tomorrow, I'm going to remind everyone that this coast has run perfectly well under my management for 7 years. That every trade agreement, every naval deployment, every infrastructure improvement has happened because I was here doing the work while Cedric was wherever he needed to be. I'm going to show them exactly how much they depend on me. Not my title, me. And then I'm going to offer them something Verea can't. What's that? Certainty. Morel returned to her chair. Verea's power is built on crisis. She's the solution to problems that keep multiplying. I'm going to eliminate the problems. And when people have to choose between someone who manages chaos and someone who prevents it, they'll choose prevention every time. Edward studied her face for a long moment. You've changed, Morel. 7 years ago, you would have tried to win him back. 7 years ago, I thought marriage was about love. She picked up her wine again. Now I know it's about power. And I'm done pretending otherwise. By nightfall, the fortress was full. Not just the Harmont delegation, representatives from every major trading house, guildmaster from the fishing collectives, military commanders from the coastal defense forces, even a few minor nobility who usually stayed neutral in political disputes. They'd come quickly, which meant they'd been waiting for something like this. Waiting for her to act. Morel walked through the great hall, listening to conversations that stopped when she approached and resumed when she moved on. She caught fragments, concerns about security, speculation about Cedric's intentions, careful questions about succession and stability. No one mentioned Verea directly, but her presence hung over every discussion like smoke. Your Grace, Admiral Cortez intercepted her near the fireplace, his naval uniform crisp despite the late hour. He was young for his rank, 40 at most, but he'd earned his position through competence rather than connection. Morel trusted him more than most. I received your message about tomorrow's session. Will you attend? I have information you'll want to hear. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. Private conversation? Morel led him to a small side chamber off the main hall. Once the door closed, Cortez's expression shifted from formal to urgent. We intercepted something 3 days ago, he said without preamble. A coded message between two ships operating in the northern corridors. My intelligence officer managed to decrypt part of it. He pulled out a small piece of paper covered in cramped handwriting. It references the Santon arrangement and mentions payment schedules that align exactly with the timing of recent raids. Morel felt her pulse quicken. This is evidence? It's fragmentary, not enough for a formal accusation, but enough to establish pattern and connection. Cortez handed her the paper. There's more. The message also references someone called the Northern Contact, someone providing information about shipping movements and cargo contents. We don't have a name yet, but the description suggests someone with access to high-level commercial intelligence. Someone in the trade guilds, or someone close to them. Cortez paused. Your Grace, if this is what it looks like, if Lady Verea is actively sabotaging coastal commerce for personal gain, this isn't just about your marriage anymore. This is about regional security. Morel read through the decoded fragments, her mind racing. Can you get more? Full messages, names, anything concrete? I'm working on it. But Morel, he used her name, not her title, which meant he was speaking as a friend, not a subordinate. You need to be careful. If Verea's built the kind of network this suggests, she's got resources and reach you can't match directly. Going after her without ironclad evidence could backfire spectacularly. Then we get ironclad evidence. Morel folded the paper carefully. Tomorrow's council session. Can you present this information? Not as an accusation, just as a security briefing? Cortez nodded slowly. I can frame it as a general threat assessment. Raise concerns without pointing fingers directly. Let people draw their own conclusions. Perfect. And Cortez, start tracking any unusual expenditures in Verea's known accounts. Large payments to shipping companies, sudden acquisitions of property near key ports, anything that suggests she's moving money in anticipation of expansion. You think she's planning something bigger? I think she's been planning this for years, Morel said. We're just finally seeing enough of the picture to recognize what it is. That night, Morel stood alone in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the polished metal mirror. She looked tired. Not fragile, not broken, but worn down in ways that had nothing to do with Cedric's absence. The woman looking back at her had spent 7 years holding together a territory while her husband collected mistresses and avoided responsibility. She'd negotiated trade agreements, mediated disputes between fishing guilds, coordinated naval patrols, managed infrastructure projects, and solved problems that Cedric didn't even know existed. And everyone called her the Duchess, like it was a courtesy title, not a position she'd earned. Isla knocked softly before entering. Your Grace, I've prepared your things for tomorrow. Thank you. Morel didn't turn around. Isla, do you think I'm weak? The question seemed to surprise her handmaid. What? No, Your Grace, It's all right. I'm just curious. Morel finally faced her. You've worked for me for 3 years. You've seen me at my worst. Do I seem fragile to you? Ila's expression was fierce. You're the strongest person I know. You've held this entire coast together while the Duke... She stopped herself, clearly worried about overstepping. While the Duke fucks his way through the noble houses and pretends it's diplomacy, Morel finished. You can say it, Isla. We both know what he is. You deserve better, Your Grace. Maybe. Morel turned back to the mirror. But better isn't always available. So instead, you work with what you have. You adapt. You survive. And eventually, if you're smart and patient and ruthless enough, you win. Is that what tomorrow is? Winning. Tomorrow is showing everyone what winning looks like when you've spent 7 years preparing for it. Morel didn't sleep much that night. She spent hours reviewing documents, confirming details, rehearsing arguments and counter-arguments. By the time dawn light started filtering through the narrow windows, she felt ready. Not confident, Confidence was for people who didn't understand the stakes. She felt prepared, which was better. The Coastal Trade Council convened at noon in the fortress's largest meeting hall. Morel had deliberately chosen this location instead of the usual neutral ground in Harmont's territory. This was her space, her power base, and she wanted everyone to feel that. 37 people filled the room, more than had attended any council session in decades. Morel stood at the head of the table, not sitting like a petitioner, but standing like someone who owned the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began. No preamble, no apologies. "We have significant security concerns that require immediate attention, and I won't waste your time pretending this is a social gathering. Admiral Cortez will brief us on recent naval intelligence. Then we'll discuss coordinated responses and resource allocation. Questions can wait until after the briefing." She saw surprise on some faces. This wasn't the gentle, accommodating Duchess they were used to. Good. That version of her had been a convenience, not a truth. Cortez stood, unrolling maps marked with raid locations and shipping routes. His presentation was clinical, methodical, devastatingly clear. By the time he finished outlining the pattern of attacks and their economic impact, the room was silent. "This isn't random piracy," Cortez concluded. "This is coordinated economic disruption with specific targets and objectives. Someone is waging commercial warfare against this coast, and they're doing it from inside our own networks." Lord Brennan spoke first, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You're saying we have a traitor?" "I'm saying someone with access to detailed commercial intelligence is providing that information to hostile actors," Cortez corrected. "Whether that person considers themselves a traitor or simply an entrepreneur is a question of perspective." "Who?" Edward's question was blunt. "We're still investigating," Cortez said carefully. "But the evidence suggests someone with connections to multiple trading houses, access to shipping schedules across different guilds, and the resources to coordinate complex financial arrangements." Morel watched faces around the table. Some looked confused, some angry, a few thoughtful. No one looked surprised. They'd all suspected something was wrong. She was just giving them permission to say it out loud. "What do you propose, Duchess?" This from Lady Thorne, a sharp-eyed woman who controlled most of the textile trade. "We can't shut down commerce while we hunt for conspirators." "No, but we can tighten information security immediately," Morel said. "Starting today, no shipping schedules or cargo manifests get distributed in their current form. We implement a new system, coded routes, staggered departure times, false manifests for high-value cargo. We make it impossible for anyone to predict movements accurately enough to coordinate attacks." "That will slow everything down," Brennan objected. "Slower is better than stolen." Morel's tone didn't invite argument. "We also need increased naval patrols, which means increased funding for Cortez's fleet. I'm proposing a temporary security tariff, 2% on all cargo moving through Coast March ports, earmarked specifically for defense." The room erupted in objections, exactly as she'd expected. Morel let them argue for 30 seconds, then raised her hand. "I'm also proposing to match that tariff personally," she said, and the room went quiet. "Every copper you pay, I pay. The duchy's resources go toward protecting your commerce. That's the deal." Edward was watching her with something that might have been admiration. "You're putting your own money into this?" "It's not my money if the coast collapses." Morel met his eyes. "We succeed together, or we fail together. That's how this works." Lady Thorne leaned back in her chair, calculating. "And what about the Duke? Does he approve this expenditure?" There it was, the question Morel had been waiting for. "The Duke granted me full authority over coastal operations 7 years ago when he realized managing them bored him. That authority hasn't been revoked, and the Duchy Charter is clear about my right to make security decisions in his absence." She paused, letting that sink in. "Unless someone here wants to argue that I've been exceeding my authority for the past 7 years? Because if so, we should probably discuss exactly how this territory has been running while the Duke was elsewhere." No one spoke. They all knew the answer to that question. "The security tariff passes," Edward said finally. "Harmont Trading supports it." One by one, the others agreed. Not because they wanted to pay more, but because Morel had made it clear that the alternative was chaos. And in the end, people would always choose order over uncertainty, even expensive order. The session continued for hours. They discussed patrol routes, intelligence sharing protocols, emergency response procedures. Morel guided the conversation with precision, pulling in voices that needed to be heard, shutting down tangents that wasted time. She wasn't trying to be liked. She was trying to be effective. When they finally broke for dinner, Edward pulled her aside. "That was impressive," he said quietly. "You just consolidated more power in 3 hours than most people manage in 3 years." "I didn't consolidate power," Morel corrected. "I organize cooperation. There's a difference." "Is there?" Edward's smile was knowing. "Because from where I'm sitting, you just got 37 of the most influential people on the coast to agree that you're the one who should be making decisions. That sounds like power to me." "Then let's hope I use it wisely." "Oh, you will." Edward glanced toward the great hall where people were gathering for the meal. "Question is, what's Cedric going to do when he realizes what you've built here?" Morel followed his gaze. "Cedric doesn't realize things, Edward. He reacts to them. There's a difference." "And Verea?" "Verea's smarter. She'll see this for what it is." Morel's expression hardened slightly. "Which means she'll have to respond. And when she does, we'll be ready." The response came faster than Morel expected. 3 days after the council session, a messenger arrived from Silverton bearing an official letter. Not from Cedric, from Verea herself, written on paper that bore no formal seal but carried unmistakable authority. "Duchess Morel, I've heard about your recent council session, how proactive of you to address these security concerns. I wonder, though, if you've considered the broader implications of your new policies. Trade relationships are delicate ecosystems. Disrupting them, even with good intentions, can have unforeseen consequences. I've taken the liberty of reaching out to several trading houses that might be affected by your proposed changes. Many have expressed concerns about the additional costs and complications. Perhaps we should coordinate our efforts. I'd hate for well-meaning reforms to accidentally damage the very commerce they're meant to protect. I'll be in Coast March next week to discuss these matters with concerned parties. I hope you'll make time to meet with me. After all, we're both working toward the same goals, stability and prosperity for the region. With sincere regards, Lady Verea Santon." Morel read the letter twice, appreciating the craftsmanship of the threat hidden in polite language. Verea was coming here, to Morel's territory, to undermine her directly. She was bringing concerned parties, probably merchants Morel had upset with the new regulations. She was framing it as cooperation while clearly positioning herself as an alternative authority. It was bold. It was dangerous. And it was exactly the opening Morel needed. She called for Thomas immediately. "Verea's coming here," she said, handing him the letter. "Next week. She's planning to hold private meetings with traders, trying to sow doubt about our security measures." Thomas read quickly, his expression darkening. "She's trying to split your support base. She's trying to prove I'm unstable and reactionary, that my policies are driven by emotion rather than strategy." Morel started pacing, "which means we need to prove the opposite. We need to show concrete results from the new security measures before she arrives." "That's not much time, Your Grace." "Then we work fast." Morel's mind was already moving through possibilities. Cortez needs to intercept a raid. Public, documented, undeniable success. If we can show that the new protocols are actually working, it undercuts her entire argument. "Intercept a raid?" Thomas looked skeptical. "Your Grace, we don't know when or where the next attack will happen." "No, but we know the pattern, and we know someone's feeding the raiders information." Morel stopped pacing, an idea forming. "What if we feed them false information, create a tempting target with a predictable route, let word leak through channels we suspect are compromised, then have Cortez waiting?" Thomas's eyes widened slightly. "You want to bait them. I want to prove our intelligence is better than theirs, that we're not just reacting. We're anticipating." Morel felt the familiar rush of strategy coming together. "Set it up, Thomas. Talk to Cortez. Make it look real. Actual cargo, actual value, everything convincing. But make sure our people know it's a trap. And if it works? Then when Verea arrives, she walks into a territory that's just demonstrated it can protect its own interests without her help. Her whole narrative collapses. And if it doesn't work?" Morel met his eyes. "Then we adapt. But Thomas, it will work. Because we're not guessing anymore. We're taking control." The trap took shape over the next 48 hours. Cortez worked with unusual efficiency, assembling a crew that looked legitimate enough to pass scrutiny but skilled enough to handle trouble. The cargo ship they selected was mid-sized, the Cormorant, captained by a grizzled veteran named Rask, who'd spent 30 years navigating these waters and had opinions about everything. "You want me to sail her like bait," Rask said when Cortez explained the plan. They were standing in the harbor at dawn, fog still clinging to the water. "That's what you're saying." "I'm saying we need to look vulnerable while being anything but," Cortez replied. "Can you do that?" Rask spat over the side of the dock. "I can make her look like she's carrying the king's treasury and crewed by drunk teenagers if that's what you need. Question is whether your intelligence is good enough to know where these bastards will hit us." "It will be." Cortez sounded more certain than he felt. Morel watched from the fortress wall, too far away to hear their conversation, but close enough to see Rask's body language, skeptical but willing. She'd learned to read people from a distance, to interpret hesitation and commitment in the angle of shoulders and the set of feet. It was a skill born from years of watching Cedric lie to her face while his posture told the truth. "Your Grace." Isla appeared beside her, holding a sealed letter. "This just arrived, from Silverton." Morel took it, recognizing Cedric's seal before she even opened it. Inside, his handwriting was messier than usual, suggesting he'd written in a hurry or while agitated. "Morel, what the hell do you think you're doing? I've had 3 separate complaints about your council session, unauthorized policy changes, inappropriate use of duchy resources, overstepping your mandate. You don't convene the Trade Council without consulting me first. You don't implement new tariffs without my approval. And you certainly don't go around making promises about duchy funding like you're the one who controls our finances. I'm trying to be understanding about your situation. I know this hasn't been easy for you, but you can't let personal feelings interfere with governance. Verea has offered to help mediate some of these trade concerns, and I think..." Morel stopped reading. The letter continued for another paragraph, but she'd already gotten everything she needed from it. Cedric was panicking. More accurately, Verea had told him to panic, and he was following instructions like he always did when someone offered him a script. "Bad news?" Isla asked carefully. "Predictable news." Morel folded the letter. "He's upset that I'm doing the job he abandoned 7 years ago. Shocking." "Will you respond?" "Eventually. Right now, I need to focus on making sure Cortez's operation works." Morel glanced at the harbor again. The Cormorant was being loaded with crates that looked valuable, actually filled with sand and stones weighted to feel authentic. The real gamble was whether the bait would reach the right people. "Has Thomas confirmed the leak?" "He thinks so. There's a clerk in Brennan's trading house, young man named Peter, who's been living well above his means lately. Thomas had someone watch his movements. He's been frequenting a tavern in the merchant quarter, meeting with people who don't match his usual social circle." "Sailors?" "Worse. Middlemen. The kind who arrange things without getting their hands dirty." Isla's voice carried distaste. "Thomas thinks he's the conduit. Information goes to him, then gets passed along through people who know how to reach the raiders." Morel felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. "Then we make sure Peter hears about the Cormorant. Something too good to resist. High-value cargo, minimal escort, predictable route through the northern channels where naval presence is thin. And if Peter isn't the leak? If we're wrong? Then we've wasted some effort and scared some honest clerk into quitting his job. But I don't think we're wrong." Morel started walking back toward the interior of the fortress. "Set it up, Isla. Make sure the information flows naturally. Complaints about the new security measures making things difficult. Gossip about merchants trying to move valuable goods before the regulations fully take effect. Make it sound like an opportunity someone created through incompetence, not intention." Isla nodded and hurried off. Morel continued to her chambers, her mind already moving to the next problem. Verea's impending arrival hung over everything like a storm cloud. The woman wasn't coming to negotiate. She was coming to demonstrate power, to show that she could operate in Morel's own territory with impunity. Unless Morel demonstrated something stronger first, Thomas found her an hour later, reviewing maps of the coastal routes. "We have movement," he said without preamble. Peter met with his usual contact an hour after word about the Cormorant reached Brennan's clerks. The contact left immediately, heading north. "How long until it reaches the raiders?" "If they're where we think they are? 2 days, maybe less." Cortez is planning to sail the Cormorant tomorrow evening, which gives them time to organize, but not enough to get suspicious about the timing. Morel traced the route with her finger. It's a narrow channel here, between the Widow's Teeth and the mainland. Perfect ambush point if you know a ship is coming through. That's where Cortez is planning to position his warships, hidden in the coves on either side waiting for the raiders to commit. Thomas paused. Your Grace, if this goes wrong, if the raiders are stronger than we expect, or if they suspect a trap, we could lose the Cormorant and her crew. Rask is good, but he's not a fighter. Neither am I, supposedly. Morel looked up from the map. But we both know how to survive, don't we? Rask will follow the plan. Cortez will handle the military aspects, and I'll make sure everyone knows that we succeeded. She saw doubt in Thomas's expression. You think I'm pushing too hard. I think you're taking risks that wouldn't be necessary if the Duke was doing his job. Thomas's voice was blunt. This isn't just about security, Your Grace. This is about proving something to people who should already know your worth. You're right. Morel stood, rolling up the map. But they don't know it. Not really. They think I've been keeping the seat warm for Cedric, playing house while he does the real work elsewhere. They've never had to see what happens when I stop asking permission and start making decisions. She met Thomas's eyes. After tomorrow, they will. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Morel kept herself busy with mundane administrative tasks, reviewing accounts, responding to correspondence, meeting with minor functionaries who needed her approval for things that didn't actually matter. She was performing normalcy while her mind counted down hours until the Cormorant sailed. Edward arrived in the late afternoon, unexpected and unwelcome. I heard about your husband's letter, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk without being invited. Word travels fast when a duke writes angry correspondence. I'm sure it does. Morel didn't look up from the document she was reading. And I'm sure people have opinions about it. Oh, plenty of opinions. Most of them stupid. Edward leaned back, studying her. Question is what you're going to do about it. Cedric's making noise about reining you in, limiting your authority. He's got people in Silverton telling him you've gone rogue. By people, you mean Verea, obviously. Edward's expression was shrewd. She's building a case that you're unstable, emotional, making rash decisions out of hurt pride. And if I'm being honest, Morel, some of what you're doing looks exactly like that from the outside. Morel finally looked up. But you don't think it is? I think you're playing a longer game than anyone's giving you credit for. I also think you're about to do something dramatic that will either validate everything you've built or destroy it completely. He tilted his head. Am I wrong? The Cormorant sails tonight. I know. I also know what she's carrying, or rather, what she's pretending to carry. Edward's voice dropped. You're using her as bait. You think you can trap whoever's been orchestrating these raids. You disapprove. I think it's brilliant and dangerous in equal measure. If it works, you prove that your security measures are effective, and that you're the one who can actually protect coastal commerce. If it fails, you look like you're playing games with people's livelihoods. Edward leaned forward. What's your margin for error here, Morel? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty damn thin. Then I'd better not fail. Morel set down her pen. Why are you really here, Edward? You didn't come to warn me about risks I already know exist. I came to tell you that Verea is bringing more people than you think. Not just traders. She's got backing from noble houses in Silverton, people who see an opportunity to expand their influence into coastal territories. She's positioning this as a rescue mission, coming to save the coast from your well-meaning but misguided leadership. Edward's expression was grim. She's going to offer them an alternative. Her network, her connections, her competence. And after what Cedric's been saying, a lot of people are ready to listen. Morel felt her stomach tighten. How many? At least a dozen significant players. Maybe more. She's calling it a trade summit, but it's really a political maneuver. She wants to show that she can command more support in your own territory than you can. When? 4 days. She moved up her timeline. Edward's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. Whatever you're planning with the Cormorant, it needs to work perfectly. Because if it doesn't, you won't have time to recover before she arrives with her entire coalition behind her. After Edward left, Morel stood at her window and watched the sun descend toward the horizon. The Cormorant was already being prepared for departure, her crew going through final checks. Somewhere out in those waters, raiders were receiving information about a vulnerable target making its way through predictable routes. And in 4 days, Verea would arrive with enough support to potentially fracture everything Morel had built. The margins were thin. Edward was right about that. But thin margins were all she'd ever had. Night fell, and the cormorant slipped out of harbor with the evening tide. Morel watched from the cliffs, her cloak whipping in the wind that always picked up after dark. She couldn't see the ship anymore, just the vast darkness of open water and the pinpoint lights of distant vessels going about their business. "Your Grace, you should come inside." Isla appeared beside her, holding a lantern. "It's cold. I need to see this through. You can't see anything from up here." "I know." But Morel didn't move. She stood there, counting the hours in her head, imagining the cormorant making her way north along routes she'd memorized from years of studying these waters. Cortez had positioned 2 warships in the coves near the Widow's Teeth, their crews waiting in disciplined silence. If the raiders took the bait, if they attacked where Morel expected them to, it would work. If they didn't, if she were more cautious or more clever or just differently organized than her intelligence suggested, then she'd burned resources and credibility on a gamble that failed. The difference between strategy and desperation was thinner than most people realized. "Isla," Morel said quietly, "if this doesn't work, if the trap fails and Verea arrives while I'm still trying to recover, I need you to do something for me." "Your Grace, I need you to take certain documents to Edward. Financial records, correspondence, evidence about the raids, and their connection to Verea's operations. Everything we've gathered." Morel turned to face her handmaid. "If I fall, someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to be able to continue this." Isla's expression was stricken. "You're not going to fall. Probably not. But the thing about leadership is having contingency plans for the moments when probably isn't enough." Morel touched Isla's shoulder briefly. "Promise me." "I promise." Isla's voice was fierce. "But you're going to succeed, Your Grace. I know you will." Morel wished she had that certainty. She stayed on the cliffs until midnight, then forced herself to return to the fortress. Sleep was impossible, but she lay in her bed and pretended, running through scenarios and counter-scenarios until her mind was exhausted. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she must have actually drifted off because she woke to urgent knocking on her door. "Your Grace!" Thomas's voice sharp with urgency. "We have word from Cortez." Morel was out of bed immediately, pulling on a robe. "What happened?" Thomas entered, his face flushed from running. "The raiders took the bait. They hit the cormorant exactly where we predicted, 15 ships in coordinated formation. But, Your Grace," he paused, catching his breath. "They were ready for more than just a cargo vessel. They brought serious firepower." Did Cortez engage? He had to. The raiders were better armed than our intelligence suggested. Military-grade weapons, trained crews, tactical coordination beyond what we've seen in previous raids. It turned into a real battle. Morel's heart was hammering. Casualties? "We don't have full numbers yet. But Your Grace, we won. Cortez captured 11 of their ships. The rest fled. And more importantly, we captured someone significant. One of the raider vessels had a passenger who wasn't part of the regular crew, someone who was directing operations." Thomas's expression shifted to something that might have been triumph. "Someone carrying documents that linked directly to Verea Santon." Morel felt the world shift. "You're certain?" Payment records, coded messages, even a personal letter from Verea discussing specific targets and timelines. "Cortez is bringing everything directly here, but he sent a fast messenger ahead to let you know." Thomas was almost smiling now. "Your Grace, we have her. We have actual proof." The relief should have been overwhelming, but Morel's mind was already racing ahead to the next problem. "Who's the prisoner? Do we know?" "Someone named Marcus Thorne." The messenger said Cortez recognized him. He used to be a naval officer, served in the Eastern Fleet about 10 years ago before he was discharged for conduct violations. Apparently he's been working as a private contractor since then. Thorne. The name triggered something in Morel's memory. Any relation to Lady Thorne from the Trade Council? Thomas's expression shifted. Her nephew. She's never mentioned him publicly. There was some scandal around his discharge. If he's working for Verea and he's related to someone on the council, then we need to be very careful about how we handle this. Morel's brief moment of satisfaction evaporated. Lady Thorne controlled significant portions of the textile trade and had supported Morel's security measures, but family loyalty could complicate that quickly. When will Cortez arrive? Tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. He's bringing the captured ships and prisoners directly to Coast March Harbor instead of holding them at the northern posts. Good. That gives us time to prepare. Morel started pacing, her mind working through implications. Thomas, I need you to send discreet word to Edward and the other council members. Not official summons, just friendly notice that Cortez has had a significant success and will be making a report. Make it sound routine. You want them here when he arrives. I want witnesses, independent, credible witnesses who can verify what we've found. Morel stopped pacing. And I want Lady Thorne to have advance warning that her nephew is involved. She deserves that much before this becomes public. Thomas nodded slowly. That's generous, considering he was part of the network attacking our commerce. It's strategic. If I blindside her, she becomes an enemy. If I give her the courtesy of private notification, she might stay neutral. Or better, she might decide that family loyalty doesn't extend to forgiving treason. Morel met his eyes. Either way, I need her not working against me when Verea arrives. You're thinking several moves ahead. I'm thinking that evidence against Verea is only useful if I can present it without fracturing the coalition I've built. And that means managing every relationship carefully, not just the obvious ones. Thomas left to send the messages, and Morel found herself alone in the pre-dawn darkness. Through her window, she could see the first hints of light touching the eastern horizon. The cormorant had survived. Her gamble had worked, and now she had something more valuable than speculation. She had proof, but proof was just information. What mattered was how she used it. Lady Thorne arrived at midday, alone and clearly agitated. She was a composed woman normally, someone who'd built a trading empire through careful negotiation and precise risk management. Seeing her rattled was unusual enough that Morel knew Thomas's message had landed hard. Duchess. Thorne's greeting was clipped. I received your steward's note. I need to know if what he suggested is true. Morel had arranged for them to meet in her private study, not the formal receiving room. This conversation needed to feel personal, not political. Sit down, Helen, please. Thorne sat, her posture rigid. Is my nephew involved in these raids? Admiral Cortez captured him last night. He was aboard one of the raider vessels, carrying documents that suggest he's been coordinating attacks for several months. Morel kept her voice even, factual. I wanted you to hear this from me before it becomes public knowledge. Thorne's face went pale. What kind of documents? Payment records. Communication with someone arranging targets and timing. Helen, the evidence suggests he's been working for Verea Santon. That's... Thorne stopped herself, visibly struggling for control. Marcus was discharged from naval service 10 years ago for insubordination and conduct violations. I haven't spoken to him since. The family disowned him. But he's still your nephew. Legally, yes. Personally? Thorne's voice was bitter. He made his choices. If he's been attacking coastal shipping, if he's been working for that woman... She stopped again, her hands clenched in her lap. What do you want from me, Morel? Why tell me this privately? Because you've been a solid ally on the council, and I don't want you to feel ambushed, and because I need to know where you stand. Morel leaned forward slightly. Verea is coming here in 3 days with significant backing from Silverton. She's going to argue that I'm the problem, that my policies are destabilizing commerce. Having proof that she's been actively orchestrating the attacks we're trying to prevent is useful, but only if the people who matter believe that proof. Thorne's eyes narrowed. You want me to publicly denounce my nephew. I want you to make an informed choice about what's more important, family reputation or regional stability. If you choose family, I understand, but I need to know so I can plan accordingly. For a long moment, Thorne was silent. Then, when Cortez arrives, I want to see the evidence personally. I want to read the documents, interview my nephew if possible. If what you're saying is true, if he's been part of this, then I'll support whatever legal proceedings follow. Family or not, I won't protect someone who's been undermining everything I've built. Morel felt respect for the woman deepen. That's all I'm asking. Thank you for being direct. Don't thank me yet. Thorne stood, her composure returning. If this evidence isn't as solid as you think, if there's any doubt about Marcus's involvement or Verea's connection, this will backfire on both of us. She's coming with half of Silverton's mercantile power behind her, Morel. If you're wrong about this, you're finished. I know. Then I hope your intelligence is better than your marriage. Thorne's voice was dry, almost sympathetic, because you're betting everything on it. After Thorne left, Morel allowed herself 5 minutes of shaking hands and tight breathing, the physical aftermath of stress she'd held at bay during the conversation. Then she forced herself to stand, to move, to keep functioning. There was too much at stake to break down now. Cortez's ships appeared on the horizon in the late afternoon, a small flotilla making its way toward Coast March Harbor. Morel watched from the fortress walls as they drew closer, able to make out individual vessels, the cormorant intact and sailing under her own power, 2 naval warships flanking her, and behind them 11 captured raider ships being towed or sailing with minimal crew. It looked like a victory procession. Morel hoped it felt like one too. The docks filled with people as the ships drew closer, traders curious about the captured vessels, naval personnel coming out to greet their returning comrades, city residents drawn by the unusual sight of so many ships arriving together. By the time Cortez's flagship docked, there were hundreds of witnesses watching. Morel descended from the fortress to meet him, with Thomas and Edward flanking her. Cortez looked exhausted, his uniform stained with smoke and salt water, but his expression was grimly satisfied. Duchess. He saluted formally. I'm pleased to report a successful operation. 11 enemy vessels captured, approximately 80 prisoners secured, and significant evidence recovered regarding the coordination and financing of pirate activities in Coast March waters. His voice carried across the docks, clearly intended for the crowd as much as for Morel. She matched his formal tone. Admiral, the Duchy is grateful for your service and the service of your crews. Were there casualties? Minor injuries only. The raiders fought, but once they realized they were outmatched, most surrendered rather than die for someone else's profit. Smart of them, Morel's voice carried approval. What about their leadership? We captured a former naval officer named Marcus Thorne who was directing tactical operations. We also recovered documents from his cabin, correspondence, payment records, operational plans. Your Grace, this wasn't opportunistic piracy. This was an organized campaign. Show me. Cortez led her aboard his flagship, away from the crowd. In his cabin, he spread documents across a table, letters in coded language that had been partially decrypted, ledgers showing payments from accounts Edward recognized as linked to Verea's known business interests, and most damning, a personal letter in Verea's own handwriting discussing specific ships and routes. This is solid, Edward said quietly, studying the evidence. This isn't circumstantial. This is direct proof of coordination. Can we verify the handwriting? Morel was already thinking ahead to how this would be challenged. I had the same thought. Cortez pulled out another document, a contract Verea had signed with one of the merchant houses, obtained from their records. Compare the signatures, same hand. Morella examined both documents carefully. The signatures matched. More than that, certain flourishes in the letters, the way Verea formed her capital 5, the slight leftward slant of her writing, were identical in both samples. Where's Thorne now? In the brig, under guard. He's been cooperative once he realized we had evidence. I think he's hoping for leniency. Cortez's expression suggested he didn't think leniency was likely. I want to talk to him. Edward looked surprised. Morel, is that wise? If he later claims you coerced him, then you'll be there as witness to ensure I don't. Morel was already moving toward the door. I need to understand the full scope of this before Verea arrives. Thorne knows things we don't. The brig was in the lower deck, a cramped space with 4 cells designed for temporary containment. Marcus Thorne occupied the first one, sitting on a narrow bench with his head in his hands. He looked up when Morel entered, and she saw the family resemblance to Lady Thorne immediately. The same sharp eyes, the same angular features. Duchess. His voice was hoarse. I suppose you're here to gloat. I'm here to understand what you thought you were accomplishing. Morel stopped outside his cell, with Edward and Cortez flanking her. You're a trained naval officer. You know these waters. You could have done legitimate work if you wanted it. Why this? Thorne laughed bitterly. Legitimate work, right. Because everyone was eager to hire the disgraced nephew of a respectable merchant. You know what legitimate work pays, Duchess? Barely enough to eat. Verea offered real money, real opportunity. To attack ships carrying goods from your own coast. to create market instability that she could capitalize on. She framed it as economic warfare, disrupting old power structures, creating space for new players. Thorne leaned back against the wall. She made it sound almost noble, like we were breaking up monopolies instead of just stealing cargo. And you believed her? I believed the money. Thorne's voice was flat. That's the part that's real, Duchess. Everything else, the justifications, the political framing, that's just decoration. She paid well. I did the work, simple transaction. Morel studied him, trying to gauge whether his cynicism was genuine or performance. How many people are working for her in similar capacities? You mean how many others has she recruited to do her dirty work? Thorne smiled without humor. More than you think. Less than she needs. Verea's smart. She keeps operations compartmentalized. I coordinated naval attacks. Someone else handles the merchant side. Someone else manages political relationships. No one person knows everything. But you know some things. I know she's planning something bigger than pirates harassing trade routes. Thorne's expression shifted, becoming more serious. The raids were just preparation, building financial resources, creating chaos, establishing herself as the solution to problems she created. Whatever she's doing in Silverton with your husband, whatever summit she's planning here in Coast March, it's all part of something larger. She's positioning herself to control this entire region, Duchess. And from what I've seen, she's got a better than even chance of pulling it off. The words hung in this cramped space, and Morel felt the weight of them settle in her chest. She'd known Verea was ambitious. She'd suspected the raids were connected to larger plans. But hearing confirmation from someone inside the operation made it real in a way intelligence reports hadn't. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because I'm already finished. Cortez has evidence that will see me hanged for piracy. My aunt has probably disowned me. Again. There's no percentage in protecting Verea now. Thorne met her eyes, and because part of me is curious to see if you can actually beat her. She's brilliant, Duchess. Ruthless and brilliant, but you're not stupid either. If anyone can outmaneuver her, it might be you. Flattering. Honest. Thorne's smile was genuine this time, if bleak. Good luck. You're going to need it. Morel left the brig with Thorne's words echoing in her skull. Ruthless and brilliant. The description fit better than she wanted to admit. She climbed back onto the deck where the afternoon sun was starting its descent, painting the harbor in shades of amber that would have been beautiful if she'd had any capacity left for noticing beauty. Your Grace. Cortez followed her up, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. What do you want done with him? Keep him secure, comfortable enough that he doesn't have reason to recant his testimony, but isolated enough that no one can get to him. Morel watched the crowd on the docks, still gathered, still watching. And Cortez, prepare a full written report of the engagement, every detail. I want it ready by tomorrow morning. You're planning to make this public. I'm planning to make it impossible to ignore. Edward was waiting on the dock when she disembarked, his expression thoughtful. You got what you needed from Thorne? I got confirmation that we're dealing with something bigger than I'd hoped. Morel started walking toward the fortress, and Edward fell into step beside her. Verea's not just building influence. She's systematically dismantling existing power structures and replacing them with herself. The raids, the trade disruptions, even Cedric's very public affair. It's all calculated. You sound almost impressed. I am impressed. I'm also furious. Morel's jaw was tight. She's using my marriage as cover for economic conquest. While everyone's watching to see if I'll collapse from humiliation, she's been quietly taking control of everything that actually matters. They reached the fortress courtyard where Thomas was coordinating the arrival of captured prisoners. He looked up as Morel approached, and she saw the exhaustion in his face, the kind that came from too many consecutive days of crisis management. Your Grace, we need to discuss accommodations. We don't have facilities for 80 prisoners. Use the lower storage rooms, post guards. Make sure they're fed but separated. I don't want them coordinating stories. Morel paused. And Thomas, send word to the council members, official this time. Emergency session tomorrow at dawn. Mandatory attendance. Thomas's eyebrows rose. Dawn is early enough that no one has time to coordinate opposition or spread counter-narratives before we meet. I want them hearing the evidence directly from Cortez before anyone else has a chance to spin it. Morel's voice was flat, the tone of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be argued out of it. This is happening, Thomas. Make it happen. He nodded and hurried off, already calling for messengers. Edward watched him go, then turned back to Morel. You're moving fast. That's smart, but it's also dangerous. If people feel rushed, then they'll feel rushed, but they'll also feel informed. Morel started climbing the steps to the main entrance. Verea arrives in 2 days, Edward. 2 days. I don't have time for slow, careful consensus building. I need everyone to see the evidence, understand what we're facing, and make their choices before she walks in here with her coalition from Silverton. And if they don't choose you? Morel stopped at the top of the steps, looking back at him. Then I lose, but at least I lose knowing I did everything possible to win. The night passed in a blur of preparation. Morel worked with Cortez to organize the evidence into a clear presentation, documents laid out in chronological order, testimony from captured raiders written up and signed, financial records traced from Verea's known accounts to payments for specific raids. It was meticulous work, the kind that made Morel's eyes burn from staring at ledgers by candlelight, but it was necessary. Evidence only mattered if people could understand it. Lady Thorne arrived near midnight, unannounced. Morel found her in the great hall, standing alone near the fireplace, staring into the flames. Helen, I didn't expect you tonight. Thorne turned, and Morel saw that she'd been crying, not dramatically, but enough to leave her eyes red and her composure fractured. I spoke with my nephew. Cortez allowed me a brief interview. I'm sorry you had to hear it from him. Don't be. I needed to. Thorne's voice was rough. He confirmed everything you said. More, actually. He was quite forthcoming about his involvement, about Verea's organization, about the scope of what they've been doing. She paused, visibly gathering herself. My nephew is a criminal. Whatever happens to him, he's earned it. But Morel, what he told me about Verea's plans, I know. Do you? Thorne's intensity was sudden, almost frightening. She's not just trying to replace you. She's trying to replace the entire existing commercial structure of this coast. She wants to control every major trade route, every significant business relationship, every political connection, and she's closer to achieving it than anyone realizes. Morel felt cold despite the fire's warmth. How much did Marcus tell you? Enough to know that tomorrow's council session is your only chance to stop her before she becomes unstoppable. Thorne moved closer, her voice dropping. The people she's bringing from Silverton, they're not just supporters, they're investors. She's promised them access to coastal trade networks, favorable terms on shipping contracts, privileged positions in whatever new order she's building, and they believe her because she's already delivered on smaller promises. She's been buying loyalty. She's been building an empire. Thorne's expression was grim. And if you can't prove to the council tomorrow that she's been doing it through criminal means, they're going to choose her over you. Because power that works is more appealing than legitimacy that struggles. After Thorne left, Morel stood alone in the great hall, feeling the weight of what was coming settle over her like a physical thing. She'd known this confrontation was inevitable since the moment she'd decided to stop waiting for Cedric to come home. But knowing something intellectually and facing it practically were different experiences. She climbed to her chambers as the midnight bells rang, but sleep felt impossible. Instead, she stood at her window watching the harbor, where captured ships sat dark and silent among the regular vessels. Physical proof of what she'd accomplished. Physical proof that might not be enough. Your Grace, Isla's voice, soft from the doorway. You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. Tomorrow will determine everything. Morel didn't turn around. Isla, if this goes badly, if I lose the council's support, you need to leave Coast March immediately. Edward will help you. There are documents in the locked chest in Thomas's office. Make sure he gets them somewhere safe. Your Grace, please don't. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. Morel finally faced her. Verea doesn't forgive opposition, and she doesn't forget. If I fall, anyone associated with me becomes a liability. I won't have your safety on my conscience. Isla's expression was fierce. You won't fall. You can't. This coast needs you. The coast needs someone competent. If it can't be me, it'll be someone else. But even as she said it, Morel knew it wasn't true. There was no one else positioned to stop what Verea was building. Not really. This was her fight, and if she lost, there wouldn't be another chance. Dawn came too quickly. Morel dressed carefully, Not in the soft, feminine clothes she usually wore to council sessions, but in something that suggested authority without performance. Dark colors, practical fabric, minimal decoration. She wasn't trying to be like today. She was trying to be believed. The council chamber filled early. Morel had expected maybe 20 people, the core council members, plus a few interested observers. Instead, nearly 40 crowded into the space, including several faces she didn't recognize. Word had spread beyond her intended audience, which could be good or catastrophic depending on how the next few hours went. Edward caught her eye from across the room, his expression concerned. Too many people meant too many opportunities for disruption, for planted opposition, for things to spiral beyond her control. But it was too late to change the venue now. "Thank you all for coming," Morel's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation. "I know the hour is early and the summons was abrupt, but we have information that affects every person in this room, and waiting to share it would be irresponsible." She gestured to Cortez, who stepped forward with the first set of documents. 2 nights ago, a carefully planned naval operation intercepted a coordinated pirate attack on the merchant vessel Cormorant. The operation was successful. We captured 11 enemy vessels and approximately 80 prisoners. More importantly, we recovered evidence that these attacks were not random piracy, but organized economic warfare directed against coast-march commerce. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Morel waited for them to quiet, then continued. "Admiral Cortez will present the evidence. I ask that you hold questions until he's finished, but I encourage you to examine every document, every record, every piece of testimony we've gathered. This is not speculation. This is proof." Cortez's presentation was masterful, clinical, detailed, devastating. He walked them through the captured documents, explaining the coded language and financial trails. He presented testimony from raiders who'd confirmed receiving payment through intermediaries connected to Verea's known business associates. He displayed the personal letter in Verea's handwriting, passing it around so everyone could examine the signature. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Not the comfortable silence of agreement, but the tense quiet of people processing information they didn't want to believe. Lord Brennan spoke first. "This is, Admiral, you're certain about the attribution, the connection to Lady Verea specifically." "The evidence speaks for itself, my lord, but yes, I'm certain." "Then we're talking about deliberate sabotage by someone with close connections to the Duke himself." Brennan's voice was careful, like he was testing how the words sounded out loud. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," Morel interrupted. "It's a finding based on documented evidence." "There's a difference." "Is there?" A new voice, sharp and skeptical. Morel didn't recognize the speaker, a thin man in expensive clothes sitting near the back. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a woman trying to discredit her husband's companion using conveniently discovered evidence." The room erupted. Half the people present started talking at once, some defending Morel, others questioning the evidence. Everyone with an opinion they needed to voice immediately. Morel let it continue for 30 seconds, then raised her hand. "Who are you?" The thin man stood, his smile cold. "Lord Petrus Vane, representing commercial interests from Silverton. I'm part of Lady Verea's delegation, which was supposed to arrive tomorrow, but decided to come early when we heard about this emergency session. Good thing too, apparently, since we're here in time to prevent a serious miscarriage of justice." Morel's stomach dropped. Verea was already here, not tomorrow, not in 2 days, here now, with her people already in the room, already positioning the narrative. "The evidence is available for anyone to examine," she said, keeping her voice level. "Including you, Lord Vane. I encourage you to review it thoroughly before making accusations about miscarriages of justice." "Oh, I will, but I suspect I'll find exactly what I expect. Circumstantial connections, ambiguous documents, and testimony from criminals who'll say anything to reduce their sentences." Vane's smile widened. "It's a clever attempt, Duchess. I'll give you that. But Lady Verea has been nothing but generous in her efforts to support coastal trade. The idea that she'd undermine the very commerce she's trying to strengthen is absurd." "Then explain the payment records." Edward's voice cut through, hard and direct. "Explain the coded messages. Explain why her handwriting appears on documents discussing specific raid targets." "I don't have to explain anything." Vane's tone was dismissive. "The burden of proof is on the accuser, and from what I'm seeing, that burden hasn't been met." The argument escalated quickly. Other members of Verea's delegation, Morel counted at least 8 people she hadn't recognized earlier. started raising objections, questioning the chain of custody for evidence, suggesting that captured pirates would fabricate anything to avoid execution, implying that Cortez's naval operation itself might have been overly aggressive. Morel watched it happen with a sick feeling in her gut. This wasn't a trial or an investigation. This was political theater, and Verea's people were performing their parts perfectly. Enough! Lady Thorne's voice was quiet, but something in her tone made everyone stop talking. She stood slowly, her face pale, but composed. I've examined the evidence personally. I've interviewed one of the captured prisoners, my own nephew, who was directly involved in organizing these attacks. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that Lady Verea orchestrated these raids for her own financial and political benefit. The room went silent again, but this time it felt different. Thorne had credibility no one could easily dismiss. Vane recovered quickly. My lady, I'm deeply sorry for your nephew's involvement in criminal activity, but surely you can see how personal connections might cloud judgment. My judgment is perfectly clear, Lord Vane. Thorne's voice was ice. My nephew is a criminal who deserves whatever punishment the law provides. But he's also someone who worked directly for Verea Santon, who took her money, who followed her orders, and he's willing to testify to that fact under oath. Coerced testimony. No one coerced anything. Marcus knows he's finished. He has nothing to gain by lying and everything to lose if he's caught perjuring himself. Thorne looked around the room, making eye contact with other council members. I understand that some of you have business relationships with Lady Verea. I understand that she's made promises about future opportunities, but I'm telling you now, those promises are built on crimes she committed against us, against our ships, our commerce, our coast. And if we ignore that because it's politically convenient, we deserve whatever happens to us next. It was the strongest speech Morel had heard in years of council sessions, and she saw its impact on faces around the room. Not everyone was convinced. Vane and his allies looked more angry than persuaded. But doubt was spreading. People were reconsidering, questioning, looking at the evidence with fresh eyes. Then the chamber doors opened, and Verea Santon walked in. She was beautiful. Morel had to admit that even now, hating the woman with every fiber of her being, not delicate beautiful, but striking, with dark hair and sharp features and eyes that assessed a room like a general surveying a battlefield. She wore traveling clothes that somehow looked elegant, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere. I apologize for the interruption. Verea's voice was warm, friendly, completely at odds with the tension filling the room. I heard there was an emergency session and thought I should attend, given that my name seems to be under discussion. Morel felt the shift in atmosphere immediately. Half the room was watching Verea with something like relief. Here was the person who could explain everything, who could make this all make sense. The other half was looking between Verea and Morel, waiting to see what would happen. Lady Verea, Morel kept her voice neutral. How convenient that you arrived just in time. Well, I was already on my way for our scheduled meeting tomorrow. When I heard about mysterious accusations being made against me, I decided to accelerate my timeline. Verea smiled, but her eyes were calculating. I believe in facing problems directly, don't you, Duchess? I do. Which is why I'm glad you're here to address the evidence we've gathered linking you to organized attacks on coastal shipping. Evidence. Verea said the word like it was decently amusing. I've been briefed on what you're calling evidence, Morel, may I? She gestured to the documents spread on the table. Morel nodded, watching as Verea moved forward and began examining papers with apparent interest. The room was completely silent now, everyone focused on this confrontation. After several minutes, Verea looked up. This is impressive. Someone has clearly gone to great effort to create a narrative connecting me to criminal activity. The payment records, the coded messages, even what appears to be my handwriting, it's all very thorough. Because it's all true, or because it's all fabricated. Verea's tone remained pleasant. Morel, I understand why you might want to believe this. Your husband and I have grown close. That must be painful for you, but constructing elaborate conspiracy theories won't change the reality of your situation. My situation? Morel felt anger rising but forced it down. Anger was what Verea wanted, emotional outbursts that would confirm the narrative of instability. Your marriage is falling apart. You're feeling abandoned and humiliated. These are natural emotions, but they're clouding your judgment. Verea's voice was almost sympathetic now, and Morel saw how effective it was. Several people in the room were nodding slightly, as if this explanation made more sense than criminal conspiracy. The raids on coastal shipping are real. The economic disruption is real. But I'm not the cause. I'm someone who's been trying to help stabilize commerce while you've been too distracted by personal matters to manage your responsibilities effectively. That's a lie. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you called an emergency council session to present evidence against me just days before I was scheduled to arrive with a delegation of potential investors. That looks less like justice and more like sabotage motivated by jealousy. Morel opened her mouth to respond, but Verea continued, her voice gaining strength. I've spent the last 6 months building relationships with trading houses across the region. I've facilitated new partnerships, opened new markets, helped merchants recover from losses caused by these pirate raids. And yes, I've done this while maintaining a personal relationship with Duke Cedric, because unlike some people, I'm capable of managing both professional and personal aspects of my life simultaneously. The implication was clear, and Morel saw it land on several faces in the room. Here was competence versus emotional instability. Here was someone who could actually get things done versus someone making desperate accusations. You're good at this, Morel said quietly. I'll give you that. You walk in here, reframe the entire narrative in under 5 minutes, make yourself look like the reasonable one, and me look like a jealous wife grasping at straws. It's masterful. Verea's smile was genuine now. I'm simply telling the truth, Duchess. No, you're telling a story that sounds like truth to people who don't want to examine it too closely. Morel stepped forward, closer to Verea, close enough to see the calculation in those dark eyes. But here's what's actually true. Marcus Thorne worked for you. He coordinated raids using intelligence you provided. He was paid from accounts you control, and he's willing to testify to all of it under oath. Marcus Thorne is a disgraced former naval officer with every reason to fabricate stories if it means avoiding execution. Verea didn't back away, didn't show any sign of concern. His testimony is worthless. Then what about the handwriting analysis? What about the payment records? Handwriting can be forged. Records can be manipulated. Verea turned to address the room. I understand that the Duchess has worked hard to build this case, but I ask you all to consider, what's more likely? That I, someone who's been publicly and transparently working to strengthen coastal trade, secretly orchestrated attacks against that same commerce? Or that a woman facing the collapse of her marriage has constructed an elaborate accusation to strike back at the person she blames for her personal unhappiness? The silence that followed was damning. Morel could see people considering Verea's words, weighing probabilities, choosing the explanation that required less cognitive dissonance. Edward stood. The evidence isn't circumstantial. The connections are documented by the Duchess and her people, who have every motivation to find exactly what they were looking for. Verea's interruption was smooth. Lord Edward, I respect your loyalty to Morel, but surely you can see how this looks from an outside perspective. I can see how you're trying to make it look. Edward's voice was hard. And I'm not convinced. Then perhaps you're too close to the situation to be objective. Verea's smile didn't waver, which is understandable, but not helpful. The argument continued, voices rising, accusations flying in both directions. Morel stood in the center of it, watching her carefully constructed case dissolve into partisan debate. This was what Verea wanted: chaos, confusion, doubt. As long as people couldn't agree on what was true, she could operate in the ambiguity. Finally, Lord Brennan raised his hands. Enough! We're not accomplishing anything like this. He looked exhausted. I propose we adjourn until tomorrow. Give everyone time to examine the evidence more thoroughly, conduct our own interviews with the prisoners, verify the documents independently. We can reconvene when we're all working from the same information. I second that motion, Vane said immediately, and Morel knew she'd lost. Delay was death in this situation. Every hour Verea had to work the room, to have private conversations, to make promises and deals, was another hour for her narrative to take hold. No, Morel's voice cut through the noise. We're not adjourning. Brennan looked surprised. Duchess, with respect, no. Morel repeated, this is my territory, my fortress, my session, and we're not done. She turned to Cortez. Admiral, bring Marcus Thorne here. Now. Cortez hesitated. Your Grace, is that... Now, Admiral. The room erupted again, people objecting, questioning, demanding explanations. Morel ignored them all, her eyes fixed on Verea, who'd finally lost her pleasant expression. For just a moment, Morel saw something else there. Calculation, worry, maybe even fear. You can't, Verea started. I can. He's my prisoner, in my custody, and I'm bringing him before this council to testify directly. You want to call his credibility into question? Fine. Everyone here can judge for themselves whether he's lying. Morel's voice was steel. Unless you'd rather we adjourn so you can make sure he doesn't live long enough to speak. The implication hung in the air, ugly and direct. Several people gasped. Vane looked furious. That's a serious accusation, Duchess, Verea said, her voice tight now, the warmth gone. You're right, it is. Morel smiled without humor. So let's test it. We'll bring Thorne up, he'll tell his story, and we'll see what happens. If he's lying like you say, it'll be obvious. If he's telling the truth, well, then we'll all know, won't we? Verea's expression was unreadable now. The pleasant mask had shattered, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Cortez left, taking 2 guards with him. The wait felt endless, the room tense with anticipation and dread. Morel stood perfectly still, aware that everything depended on the next few minutes. If Thorne recanted, if he refused to testify, if something, anything, went wrong, she was finished. The doors opened. Cortez entered, followed by the guards. Marcus Thorne wasn't with them. Cortez's face was white. Your Grace, he's dead. The room exploded into chaos. Morel felt the floor tilt beneath her, the world narrowing to Cortez's stricken expression and the terrible certainty settling in her chest. What happened? Her voice sounded distant, wrong. Poison. We think. He was fine an hour ago, then suddenly... Cortez stopped, visibly struggling. He's gone, Your Grace. I'm sorry. Morel turned slowly to look at Verea, who stood perfectly composed, her expression concerned and sympathetic. How tragic, Verea said softly. But I suppose desperate men do desperate things. Suicide among imprisoned criminals is unfortunately common. Their eyes met across the chaos of the chamber, and Morel saw the truth there. Not suicide, murder. Organized, efficient, absolutely ruthless. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing she could prove. The silence after Cortez's announcement felt like drowning. Morel's ears rang with it, her vision narrowing to Verea's carefully neutral expression. Around them, the council chamber descended into noise, accusations, demands for investigation, panicked speculation about security failures. But all Morel could hear was the blood rushing in her own head and the single thought repeating like a drumbeat. She killed him, and she's going to walk away. This is unconscionable, Lord Brennan's voice cut through the chaos. A prisoner dies in custody hours before he's set to testify? Admiral Cortez, I demand an immediate investigation into your security protocols. Cortez looked like he'd been struck. My lord, I assure you, your assurances mean nothing if you can't keep prisoners alive. Brennan's face was flushed with anger, or maybe fear. Morel couldn't tell which. How did poison get into a secured cell? We don't know yet, Cortez said, his voice strained. We'll examine everything. The food, the water, anyone who had access. Of course you will. Verea's interjection was smooth, sympathetic, and I'm sure you'll find that Marcus Thorne, facing execution for piracy, chose to end his life on his own terms rather than face public humiliation. It's tragic, but hardly mysterious. Morel watched Verea work the room, saw how effectively she was spinning this disaster into something manageable, even predictable. Suicide made sense to people who didn't want to believe in conspiracy. It required no investigation, no uncomfortable questions about who had access or motivation. It was clean. But it was a lie, and Morel knew it with bone-deep certainty. No. The word came out of Morel's mouth before she'd fully formed the thought. No, that's not what happened. Verea turned to her, eyebrows raised in polite inquiry. I'm sorry, Duchess. Marcus Thorne didn't kill himself. He was murdered to prevent his testimony. Morel's voice was steady, despite the rage burning in her chest. And everyone in this room knows who benefited from his death. The temperature in the chamber dropped. People stopped moving, stopped talking, frozen by the directness of the accusation. Mirel, Edward's voice held warning. Be very careful what you say next. Why? Because accusing someone of murder requires proof? I had proof. You all saw it, documents, testimony, financial records, and now the one person who could connect all of it directly to Verea is conveniently dead. Mirel looked around the room, meeting eyes, forcing people to engage. You think that's coincidence? I think you're distraught and making wild accusations, Verea said calmly, which is understandable given the stress you're under, but extremely inappropriate. I arrived in Coast March only hours ago. I've been in public view the entire time. The idea that I somehow arranged a prisoner's death, you didn't do it yourself, you had someone else do it. That's how you've been operating all along, using intermediaries, keeping your hands clean, maintaining deniability. Mirel's words came faster now, fueled by desperation and fury. But we both know what happened here. You had Thorne killed because he was going to expose you. This is slander. Lord Vane was on his feet, his thin face tight with anger. The Duchess is making baseless accusations without a shred of evidence, driven by personal vendetta. This council should examine who had the means and opportunity to poison a prisoner in a secured cell. Lady Thorne's voice cut across Vane's, cold and precise. Because that's not something that happens by accident. Vane rounded on her. Your nephew is a criminal facing execution. Suicide is the obvious explanation. My nephew was a coward, but he wasn't suicidal. I spoke with him yesterday. He was frightened, yes, but he was also cooperating, hoping for leniency. He had every reason to stay alive and testify. Thorne's voice shook slightly, but her gaze was steady. Someone wanted him dead, and the only person with clear motivation was the one he was prepared to testify against. The room fractured again, people taking sides, arguments erupting in clusters. Mirel saw the council dissolving in front of her, cohesion breaking down into factions and fear. She'd lost control of the narrative, lost the momentum, lost everything she'd been building toward, and Verea knew it. The woman stood calm in the center of chaos, a picture of wronged innocence, waiting for the storm to pass. Mirel felt something shift inside her, a cold clarity replacing the rage. She couldn't win this argument. The evidence was dead, the testimony silenced, and every word she spoke now sounded more like desperate accusation than reasoned proof. Fighting this battle would only make her look worse. So she needed to change the battlefield entirely. You're right. Mirel's voice cut through the noise, and the room went quiet again. I can't prove Verea had Marcus Thorne killed. I can't prove she orchestrated the raids, even with all the evidence we gathered, because proof, apparently, requires someone to confess directly, and the one person who could do that is dead. She saw confusion on faces around the room. This wasn't what they'd expected her to say. But here's what I can prove. Mirel walked to the table where documents were still scattered. I can prove that coastal commerce has been under systematic attack for months. I can prove that those attacks have followed patterns suggesting inside information and coordination. I can prove that Admiral Cortez successfully intercepted one of those attacks using intelligence and tactics I authorized. And I can prove that this coast has been safer and more prosperous under my management than it was before I took an active role in governance. She picked up the ledger showing trade statistics, holding it up. These are the numbers. Tariff revenues, shipping volumes, commercial contracts, infrastructure improvements. All of it documented, all of it verifiable. Whatever you think about my accusations against Lady Verea, whatever you believe about my motivations or my marriage or my emotional state, these results are real. Edward was watching her with something that might have been understanding dawning in his expression. So here's what I'm proposing. Mirel set down the ledger and looked around the room. We investigate Marcus Thorne's death thoroughly. Admiral Cortez examines every aspect of security, every person who had access, every possibility. We continue analyzing the evidence we've gathered about the raids and their organization. And while that's happening, we implement the security measures I've already outlined, increased naval patrols, revised information protocols, coordinated response systems. That's exactly what we were already, Brennan started. Mirel continued, her voice hardening. We establish a formal oversight structure for all commercial operations in Coast March territories. A council-based system where no single person, not me, not the Duke, not any outside party, can make unilateral decisions about trade policy, security arrangements, or resource allocation. Everything gets reviewed, approved, and monitored by elected representatives from the major trading houses and guilds. That got everyone's attention. Verea's pleasant expression finally cracked, replaced by sharp calculation. "You're proposing to limit your own authority." Lord Brennan looked genuinely surprised. "I'm proposing to make authority transparent and accountable. If people trust the system more than they trust individuals, then the system should be what governs us." Morel met his eyes. Lady Verea has built her influence on the premise that she's more competent than existing leadership. Fine. Let's create a structure where competence is measured objectively, where decisions are made collectively, where no one person, no matter how charming or well-connected, can manipulate outcomes for personal gain. She saw Verea's jaw tighten. This wasn't what the woman had prepared for. Her entire strategy depended on positioning herself as the strong alternative to weak existing governance. But if governance itself became institutionalized, distributed, resistant to individual control, her personal influence became less valuable. "This is a dramatic restructuring," Edward said carefully. "The kind of thing that requires extensive planning. Then we start planning immediately. Draft proposals, consult with legal experts, present options at the next full council session." Morel was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "But we establish the principle now, today, that coast-march governance will be based on institutional accountability, not personal power." "The Duke would never agree to this," Vane objected. "You're talking about fundamentally altering how duchy territories are managed. The Duke has been absent for 7 years. He's forfeited any right to object to how I manage the territories he abandoned." Morel's voice was flat. "And if he wants to challenge that, he's welcome to come here and make his case in person. Until then, I'm exercising the authority he granted me when he decided governance was too boring to bother with." The silence that followed was different than before, contemplative rather than shocked. Morel could see people processing, calculating, considering possibilities. This was unexpected enough to be interesting, radical enough to feel like change, but structured enough not to sound like chaos. Verea recovered quickly. "This is a desperate maneuver, Morel. You're trying to lock everyone into a system that preserves your influence while blocking anyone else from participating meaningfully. Then propose improvements. Suggest modifications. Help design the structure." Morel smiled without warmth. "If you're really here to strengthen coastal commerce like you claim, this should appeal to you. Transparent governance, collective decision-making, accountability to the people who actually do the work of trade and production. Unless, of course, your actual goal is personal power rather than regional stability." It was a trap, and Verea knew it. Opposing the proposal made her look like exactly what Morel had accused her of being. Supporting it meant accepting limitations on her own ability to operate independently. "I think," Lady Thorne said into the tense silence, "that the Duchess's proposal has merit, not as a permanent solution, but as an interim framework while we investigate these various concerns. It prevents any single party from consolidating too much power during a period of uncertainty." "I agree." Edward's endorsement was immediate. "We establish oversight committees, implement the security measures, and continue investigating both the raids and Marcus Thorne's death. Everything stays transparent. Everything gets reviewed by multiple parties." Brennan looked between them, clearly uncomfortable but also seeing the political logic. "How would this work practically? We can't run the coast by committee for every minor decision." "We establish clear authority tiers," Morel said, already having thought this through. "Routine operations continue as normal. Significant policy changes, major expenditures, security decisions above a certain threshold, those require council approval. Emergency situations can be handled by designated authorities, but must be reported and reviewed afterward." She paused. "And anyone who violates the protocols faces immediate removal from decision-making authority." "Including you," Vane said sharply. "Including me. Including anyone." Morel met his eyes. "That's what accountability means, Lord Vane, no exceptions." The debate continued for another hour, people arguing details and raising objections and proposing modifications. But Morel could feel the momentum shifting, not toward her specifically, but toward the idea, toward something that felt like structure and stability in the middle of chaos. By the time Brennan called for a preliminary vote on establishing the framework, nearly two-thirds of the room supported it. Verea voted against, which surprised no one. But several of her delegation abstained rather than opposing directly, which told Morel they were already calculating how to operate within the new system rather than fighting it. "This isn't over," Verea said quietly as the session finally adjourned. She'd maneuvered close to Morel in the crowd, speaking low enough that only the two of them could hear. "You think you've outmaneuvered me, but all you've done is buy time. Time is all I need." Morel kept her voice equally quiet. "Because every day that passes, more people see what you actually are. Today, they saw you kill a witness. Tomorrow, they'll see something else. Eventually, there won't be enough charm and clever words to cover it all. Marcus Thorne killed himself. You have no proof otherwise. I have you, walking around, making mistakes, getting desperate." Morel smiled coldly. "You're good, Verea, maybe even brilliant, but you're not perfect, and you just showed everyone that you're willing to kill to protect yourself. That's going to haunt you." Verea's expression was unreadable. "We'll see who haunts whom, Duchess." She walked away, her delegation following, leaving Morel standing in the emptying chamber. Edward approached slowly, his expression concerned. "That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the most reckless," he said. "I haven't decided which yet." "Both, probably." Morel felt exhaustion washing over her now that the immediate crisis had passed. "I lost the testimony. I lost the direct proof. But I got something else. I got a system that limits her ability to operate independently. It's not victory, but it's not defeat either. It's survival." Edward's voice was gentle, which, given where you were an hour ago, is pretty remarkable. Thomas appeared, looking harried. "Your Grace, we need to discuss security. If someone was able to poison Thorne—" "I know, we're vulnerable." Morel started walking toward the exit, suddenly desperate to be out of this room. "Double the guards on the remaining prisoners. No one goes near them without multiple witnesses present. And Thomas, I want to know everyone who was in the fortress last night. Every guest, every servant, every person who had any access to the lower levels." "That's going to be a long list, Your Grace." "Then start making it." The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical crisis management. Cortez launched a formal investigation into Thorne's death, interviewing guards and examining the cell. Thomas coordinated security reviews and compiled lists of potential suspects. Edward helped draft the preliminary framework for the Oversight Council, translating Morel's half-formed ideas into actual legal language. By evening, Morel was so tired she could barely think straight, but sleep felt impossible with everything still unresolved, so she climbed to the fortress walls and stood looking out at the darkening ocean. "Your Grace," Isla's voice, soft with concern, "you should eat something. You've had nothing all day." "I'm not hungry. You're going to collapse if you don't take care of yourself." Isla moved closer, her young face tight with worry. "What happened today? With Marcus Thorne? It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I'm the one who brought him up from the brig. I'm the one who made him valuable enough to kill." Morel's voice was hollow. "He'd still be alive if I'd left him alone. He'd still be a criminal who attacked innocent ships. His death doesn't change what he did." Isla hesitated. "Your Grace, do you really think Lady Verea arranged it?" "Yes, but thinking it and proving it are different things." Morel watched lights beginning to appear in the harbor town below. "She's better at this than I gave her credit for. Smarter, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever it takes. I keep reacting to what she does instead of anticipating it." "You anticipated enough to survive today. That Oversight Council idea, that was brilliant." "That was desperation." Morel rubbed her eyes. "But maybe desperation looks like brilliance sometimes. I don't know anymore." A messenger arrived before dawn the next morning, waking Morel from restless half-sleep. The letter was from Silverton, from Cedric, and even before opening it, Morel knew it would be bad. She was right. "Morel, what the hell are you doing? I've had reports about your council session, about accusations against Verea, about some insane proposal to restructure duchy governance. This stops now. You've exceeded your authority and embarrassed both of us with these wild conspiracies. I'm returning to Coast March immediately. We need to have a serious conversation about your conduct and your future role in managing duchy affairs." I've tolerated your independence because it was convenient, but you've clearly lost perspective. Verea has done nothing but try to help, and you've repaid her with slander and political sabotage. I arrive in 3 days. Be prepared to defend your actions. And Morel, seriously consider whether you want to continue fighting battles you cannot win. Cedric Morel read the letter twice, then handed it to Thomas, who'd brought it up. He's coming. Thomas scanned it quickly, his expression darkening. In 3 days. With Verea having 3 days to shape his understanding of everything that's happened here. Exactly. Morel stood, her mind already racing. She's going to use him. Position herself as the reasonable one trying to help while I'm the unstable wife making unfounded accusations. And Cedric will believe her because it's easier than believing he's been sleeping with someone orchestrating crimes against his own territory. What are you going to do? Morel thought about that. 3 days. Cedric would arrive expecting to find her defensive, emotional, backed into a corner. He'd expect her to appeal to their marriage, to whatever remained of their relationship. He'd expect personal drama. She needed to give him something else entirely. Thomas, send messages to every council member. Emergency expanded session in 2 days. Full attendance mandatory, including representatives from the trading guilds, the fishing collectives, the textile manufacturers, the shipbuilders, everyone with a stake in coastal commerce. That's going to be 50 people, Your Grace. Maybe more. Good. I want witnesses. Lots of them. Morel started pacing, ideas forming. And contact the legal archive in Harmont. I need every document related to duchy governance structures, historical precedents for oversight councils, examples of similar systems from other territories. You're building a formal case for the restructuring. I'm building something Cedric can't dismiss as emotional reaction. He wants to challenge my authority? Fine. We'll have that conversation in front of everyone who actually keeps this coast running, with legal documentation and historical precedent and documented evidence of everything I've accomplished while he was off playing house with his mistress. Morel's voice was hard. If he's going to try to strip my authority, he'll have to do it publicly, in front of people who know exactly how much work I've been doing. But Thomas looked almost impressed. That's ruthless, Your Grace. That's survival. There's a difference. Morel stopped pacing. And Thomas, I need Admiral Cortez's investigation results before that session. Whatever he's found about Thorne's death, I need it documented and ready to present. What if he hasn't found anything conclusive? Then we present the inconclusiveness. The fact that a prisoner in military custody died under mysterious circumstances hours before testifying is damning on its own, whether we can prove murder or not. Over the next 2 days, Morel worked with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She reviewed every decision she'd made in 7 years of managing coastal affairs, documenting successes and explaining setbacks. She compiled trade statistics, infrastructure improvements, diplomatic agreements, security arrangements. She worked with Edouard and Thorne to refine the Oversight Council proposal, adding details and safeguards and implementation timelines. And she prepared herself emotionally for seeing Cedric again. That was harder than the practical preparation. She'd spent so long being angry at him that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to look at him without fury clouding her vision. But anger wasn't going to serve her in the coming confrontation. She needed to be cold, strategic, unshakable. The expanded council session convened on a gray morning with storm clouds gathering over the ocean. Morel had deliberately chosen the largest hall in the fortress, knowing they'd need the space. She hadn't anticipated quite how many people would show up. Nearly 70 crowded into the chamber, representing every significant economic interest on the coast. Verea was there, of course, seated prominently with her Silverton delegation. She looked confident, almost amused, like she was watching an entertaining performance. Morel opened the session before anyone else could try to control the narrative. Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, 2 major sessions in less than a week, but we're facing unusual circumstances that require collective attention. She gestured to the documents arranged on tables along the walls. Before we begin formal discussion, I want everyone to review the materials I've prepared. Trade statistics for the past 7 years. Infrastructure projects and their outcomes. Security improvements and their measurable impact. Legal precedents for governance restructuring. And Admiral Cortez's preliminary findings regarding the death of Marcus Thorne. Bam. She saw Verea's confidence flicker slightly at that last item. These documents are available for anyone to examine, copy, or challenge. Everything I'm about to discuss is based on verifiable evidence, not speculation or emotion. Morel kept her voice level, professional. The question before this council is simple. How should Coast March be governed going forward? What structures best serve the people who live and work here? Lord Brennan cleared his throat. Duchess, with respect, this seems premature. The Duke is arriving tomorrow. Shouldn't we wait for his input before making fundamental decisions about governance? The Duke has been absent for 7 years. Morel's response was immediate. During that time, I've managed every aspect of coastal administration, negotiated treaties, resolved disputes, coordinated security, developed infrastructure, and maintained the economic systems that keep this region functioning. Not because I wanted power, but because someone had to do the work and he wasn't here. She saw heads nodding around the room, people who'd worked with her, who knew exactly how much she'd been doing. Now suddenly, when decisions are being questioned and authority is being challenged, he's coming back. Not to help, not to collaborate, but to defend his authority and correct my conduct. Morel's voice remained steady, but something cold leaked into it. So yes, Lord Brennan, we could wait for his input, or we could acknowledge that the people who've actually been doing the work of governance should be the ones deciding how it's structured. Those are strong words, Duchess, Verea said smoothly. Some might call them disloyal. Some might call 7 years of abandonment neglect. But I'm not interested in personal accusations. Morel met Verea's eyes. I'm interested in building systems that work regardless of who's in charge. That's what the Oversight Council proposal accomplishes. It creates accountability that doesn't depend on individual virtue or competence. Edward stood, holding up one of the legal documents. I've reviewed the Duchess's proposal thoroughly. It's actually quite moderate. It doesn't strip authority from the Duke or the Duchess. It just requires major decisions to be reviewed by representatives of affected parties. This is standard practice in most coastal trading hubs. It's a power grab dressed up as reform, Vane objected. The Duchess is trying to lock in her own authority while preventing legitimate challenges. Then propose modifications. Lady Thorne's voice cut across Vane's. That's how governance works. We debate, we refine, we improve. What we don't do is dismiss ideas just because we don't like who proposed them. The debate that followed was intense but substantive. People raised legitimate concerns about implementation, about jurisdictional boundaries, about how to handle emergencies. Morel answered each question directly, acknowledging limitations and proposing solutions. She wasn't trying to win an argument, she was trying to build consensus. And slowly, painfully, she was succeeding. By midday, rough agreement had formed around a modified version of the Oversight Council. It would have advisory authority initially, with full decision-making power phasing in over 6 months. Council membership would be elected by guilds and trading houses, with term limits and conflict of interest rules. The Duke and Duchess would retain emergency powers, but would have to report and justify their use. It wasn't perfect. It left room for manipulation and argument and all the normal problems of collective governance. But it was something, a framework that people could actually work within. Verea had been quiet for the last hour, which Morel found more concerning than opposition. The woman was too smart to waste energy fighting battles she couldn't win. She was planning something. I have a question. Verea's voice was pleasant as she finally spoke. This Oversight Council, it's designed to prevent any single person from consolidating too much power, correct? That's the principle, yes, Morel confirmed. Then I assume it applies to you as well as to anyone else. Your decisions would be subject to review, your authority limited by collective approval. Obviously, that's the entire point. Wonderful. Verea smiled. Then I'd like to propose that the Council's first action should be reviewing the Duchess's recent conduct. Specifically, her authorization of what appears to have been an aggressive naval operation that resulted in the death of a prisoner before he could defend himself against accusations. The room went silent. Morel felt the trap spring shut. Marcus Thorne died after the naval operation, she said carefully. And he wasn't defending himself. He was cooperating with investigators, according to you. But we only have your word for that since he's conveniently dead and can't speak for himself. Verea's tone was sympathetic, almost sad. I'm not accusing you of anything improper, Morel. I'm simply suggesting that if we're creating an oversight system, It should examine all recent decisions that had significant consequences, including yours. It was brilliant. Verea was using Morel's own proposal against her, forcing her to accept investigation or look like a hypocrite. And if the investigation happened, Verea's people would control the narrative, twisting the naval operation into something aggressive and questionable rather than justified and successful. Morel looked around the room, seeing calculation on faces. People weighing political positions, considering alliances, trying to determine which way would benefit them most. Then Lady Thorne stood. "I'll second that proposal," she said, and Morel's stomach dropped. "We should absolutely review the Duchess's decisions. And while we're at it, we should also review Lady Verea's commercial activities over the past 6 months. Her business relationships, her financial transactions, her correspondence with various parties. If we're establishing accountability, let's establish it for everyone operating in coastal territories, not just official authority figures." Verea's smile froze. "We should examine," Thorne continued, her voice gaining strength, "why certain trading houses that work with Lady Verea have experienced remarkably few pirate attacks while their competitors have been hit repeatedly. We should investigate the financial relationships between people in her network and the timing of various raids. We should look at everything, Lady Verea, since you're so committed to transparency." The silence was electric. Morel saw understanding dawning on faces around the room. If they opened investigation, it cut both ways. Verea had been trying to weaponize oversight against Morel, but Thorne had just made it mutual. "I have no objection to transparency," Verea said, but her voice was tight now. "My business dealings are legitimate and documented." "Excellent. Then you won't mind the council reviewing those documents." Thorne's expression was pleasant. "Along with interviewing your business associates, examining your communications, and verifying the sources of various payments. Standard accountability, as you said." Verea's jaw worked silently. She was trapped in the same mechanism she'd tried to use against Morel. "Perhaps," Edward said into the tense silence, "we should table specific investigations until the Oversight Council is actually established and operating. Creating the structure first, then determining its initial priorities seems more logical than trying to investigate everything simultaneously." It was a diplomatic escape hatch, and Morel saw people reaching for it gratefully. The vote to table investigations until later passed almost unanimously, everyone preferring to avoid immediate confrontation. But something had shifted. Verea's attempt to weaponize the system had been turned against her publicly. People had seen her try to manipulate the process, and they'd seen it fail. It wasn't victory, but it was damage. To her credibility, to her image as the reasonable alternative. The session concluded with preliminary approval for the Oversight Council framework, pending legal review and final implementation plans. Not everything Morel had wanted, but more than she'd expected to achieve. As people filed out, Edward caught her arm. That was closer than it should have been. "I know." Morel felt drained. "But we survived, again." "Cedric arrives tomorrow. You ready for that?" "No." "But I don't have to be ready. I just have to be unmovable." She looked at Edward. "Whatever he says, whatever threats he makes, I'm not backing down. This coast deserves better than governance by neglect and mistress politics." Edward's expression was serious. "He could try to strip your authority entirely, claim you've exceeded your mandate, violated his trust, embarrassed the duchy. He's got enough support in Silverton to make it stick if he pushes hard enough. Then I'll force him to push publicly in front of everyone who knows what I've actually accomplished. Let people choose between 7 years of competent governance and whatever Verea's promising him." Morel's voice was hard. "I'm done hiding from this confrontation, Edward. If Cedric wants a fight, he's going to get one." The next morning, Morel stood on the fortress walls and watched Cedric's ship enter the harbor. It was impressive, larger than necessary, flying duchy colors, clearly meant to project authority and importance. Typical Cedric, she thought, always worried about appearances, never about substance. She descended to meet him at the docks, bringing Thomas and Cortez, but no one else. If this was going to be a confrontation, she wanted it contained initially. Time to assess Cedric's actual intentions before it became public theater. He looked older than she remembered, still handsome in that careless way he'd always had, but there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago. He was accompanied by a dozen retainers and, inevitably, Verea. "Morel?" His greeting was cold, formal. "We need to talk." "Welcome home, Cedric. It's been a while." His jaw tightened at the implied criticism. My office. Now. Your office hasn't been used in 7 years. Mine, however, is quite functional. We can talk there. Morel's voice was pleasant, but she wasn't moving. They stared at each other for a long moment, a test of wills playing out in silence. Finally, Cedric gestured sharply toward the fortress. In Morel's office, which had been Cedric's once but bore no trace of him anymore, he rounded on her immediately. What the hell do you think you're doing? I've had reports about your behavior, wild accusations, political manipulation, trying to restructure duchy governance without my approval. This stops now, Morel. I've tolerated your independence, but you've gone too far. I've gone too far? Morel's voice was quiet, dangerous. I've spent 7 years managing everything you abandoned. Every trade agreement, every security decision, every piece of infrastructure, every diplomatic relationship. I did that. Not you. Me. While you were off pretending your mistress was more important than your responsibilities. Verea is not... Don't. Morel held up a hand. Don't insult both of us by pretending this is anything other than what it is. You've been living with her in Silverton while I've been here doing the actual work of governance. Everyone knows it. Your pretending otherwise just makes you look weak. Cedric's face flushed. You have no right. I have every right. You gave me authority over coastal administration 7 years ago because you couldn't be bothered to do it yourself. I've exercised that authority competently and successfully. If you want to challenge that now, fine. But you'll do it in front of the people who've been working with me, who know exactly what I've accomplished. This Oversight Council scheme is supported by 2/3 of the coastal trading interests. I can provide you with written endorsements if you'd like. Morel's voice was steady. It's a reasonable reform that creates accountability and transparency, unless you're opposed to accountability, Cedric. He stared at her like he'd never seen her before. What happened to you? I grew up. I stopped waiting for you to come home and started building something that works without you. Morel leaned against her desk, feeling suddenly tired. You want to fight me on this? Go ahead. Call a full council session, make your case, try to strip my authority, but understand, if you do that, everyone will see exactly what you are. An absent duke who shows up only when his authority is questioned, who sides with his mistress over his wife, who cares more about control than effective governance. Morel, Verea started, her voice conciliatory. No, you don't get to speak here. Morel's eyes didn't leave Cedric. This is between me and my husband. You can manipulate him all you want when I'm not around, but right now, you're just the woman who helped him abandon his responsibilities. Verea's pleasant expression cracked, showing something cold underneath. Cedric looked between them, clearly struggling. I didn't abandon anything. I was managing other duchy interests. You were sleeping with her and pretending it was diplomacy. Morel's voice was flat. Stop lying, Cedric. At least have the dignity to be honest about what you've chosen. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken truth. Finally, Cedric spoke, his voice quieter. What do you want? I want the Oversight Council approved. I want my authority over coastal governance confirmed officially and permanently. I want security resources allocated to Admiral Cortez without interference. And I want you to stay out of day-to-day administration unless you're actually going to be here doing the work. Morel paused. In exchange, I'll stop publicly questioning your relationship with Verea. You can live however you want in Silverton. I don't care anymore. But the coast is mine, Cedric. I've earned it. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something like respect flicker in his expression, or maybe just recognition that fighting her would be more trouble than it was worth. Fine, he said finally. The Oversight Council proceeds. Your authority over coastal matters is confirmed. But Morel, this doesn't mean... It means exactly what I said it means. Nothing more, nothing less. Morel straightened. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. You're welcome to attend the council session tomorrow if you want to see how governance actually works. Or you can return to Silverton. Either way, the coast will be fine. She walked out of her own office, leaving Cedric and Verea standing there. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't let anyone see that until she reached her private chambers. Then she sat down and let herself shake. Not from fear, from the sheer relief of finally saying everything she'd been holding back for 7 years. Thomas found her an hour later. Your Grace, the Duke is preparing to leave. He's not staying for the council session. Good. One less complication. Morel looked up. Did he sign the authorization documents? Yes, Your Grace. Full confirmation of your coastal authority, approval for the Oversight Council, resource allocations for security. Everything you asked for. Thomas hesitated. He looked defeated. He was. He just didn't know it until I made him say it out loud. Morel stood, feeling steadier. What about Verea? She's staying. Says she has business interests to protect. Of course she does. Morel smiled without humor. Let her stay. Without Cedric here to legitimize her, she's just another merchant trying to operate in my territory. And now we have oversight structures to monitor exactly what she's doing. That evening, Morel returned to the cliffs where this had all started. The ocean crashed below, relentless and uncaring. But she didn't feel small standing against it anymore. She felt like she'd learned to read its patterns, to anticipate its movements, to survive its storms. Edward joined her, silent for a while, just standing in companionable quiet. You won, he said finally. I survived. There's a difference. Take the win, Morel. You've earned it. Edward's voice was gentle. 7 years of work, finally acknowledged. Cedric backing down. The Oversight Council approved. Verea's influence limited. These are real victories. As long as she's still here, nothing's finished. Maybe not. But you're not the one on the defensive anymore. That counts for something. Morel thought about that, watching the sun descend toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of fire and shadow. Maybe Edward was right. Maybe she had won something today. Not everything, not permanently, but enough. Enough to keep fighting. Enough to keep building. Enough to prove that she belonged here. Not as someone's wife or placeholder, but as the person who'd earned authority through 7 years of competent governance. The ocean kept moving, kept crashing against the cliffs. But the cliffs were still standing, and so was she. The Oversight Council's first official meeting happened 3 weeks later, in a hall that smelled of new wood and old ambitions. Morel had insisted on building something purpose-made rather than continuing to crowd into existing spaces. A deliberate statement that this wasn't temporary compromise but permanent restructuring. 23 representatives filled the chamber, elected by their guilds and trading houses, carrying authority that came from people who actually did the work rather than inherited titles. Verea attended as an observer, which was her right as someone with commercial interests in the region. She sat in the back, perfectly composed, watching everything with those calculating eyes. Morel opened the session with the mundane business of governance, approving routine expenditures, reviewing trade agreements, discussing harbor maintenance schedules. Boring stuff, the kind of work that kept territories functioning but never made for dramatic stories. She did it deliberately, establishing that this council was about actual administration, not political theater. But 40 minutes in, Admiral Cortez raised his hand. I have findings to present regarding the death of Marcus Thorne. The room went quiet. This was what everyone had been waiting for, the investigation that had been running quietly for weeks while other business proceeded. Go ahead, Admiral, Morel said, keeping her voice neutral. Cortez stood, holding a folder thick with documents. We conducted extensive analysis of the cell, the food, the water supply, and every person who had access to the detention area during the relevant time frame. We also performed a thorough examination of Thorne's body, which our physician documented in detail. He pulled out the first report. The cause of death was definitely poison, specifically a concentrated extract of nightshade mixed with something to mask the taste. The dosage was precise, suggesting someone with knowledge of toxins and their effects. Death would have occurred approximately 2 to 3 hours after ingestion. Which means the poison was administered when? Lord Brennan asked. Based on the timeline and the physician's analysis, sometime in the early morning hours, roughly 4 hours before the Duchess requested Thorne be brought to the council session. Cortez's expression was grim. The delivery method was water. We found trace residue in his drinking cup that matched the toxin found in his body. So someone poisoned his water. Lady Thorne's voice was tight. Who had access? That's where it gets complicated. Cortez pulled out another document. Standard protocol meant guards brought water twice daily, once at dawn, once at dusk. But we also found evidence that someone accessed the cells outside those standard times. There's a back entrance to the detention area, normally kept locked, that shows signs of recent use. The lock mechanism had fresh scratches, consistent with someone picking it. Verea spoke from the back of the room. So an intruder broke in and poisoned him. That could be anyone. One of his former associates, someone trying to silence him for reasons unrelated to Lady Verea's accusations. Possibly, Cortez acknowledged, except we also found this. He held up a small piece of fabric, caught on a rough edge near the back entrance. High-quality silk, dyed with expensive pigment, not the kind of material a common criminal would wear. He passed it to the nearest council member, who examined it and passed it along. When it reached Verea, Morella watched her face carefully. The woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly on the fabric before she handed it forward. Expensive fabric proves nothing, Verea said calmly. Plenty of people in this fortress wear quality clothing. True, but we also interviewed everyone who was in the fortress that night. Most people could account for their whereabouts with multiple witnesses. A few couldn't, including several members of your delegation, Lady Verea. Cortez's tone remained professional. I'm not making accusations, I'm presenting findings, but the evidence suggests someone with resources and access arranged Thorne's death, and the timing, hours before he was set to testify, is suspicious. Suspicious isn't proof, Lord Vane said sharply. He was sitting near Verea, clearly still aligned with her interests despite Cedric's departure. You're asking this council to believe a conspiracy theory based on fabric scraps and convenient timing. I'm asking this council to acknowledge that a prisoner died under circumstances that merit serious concern. Cortez's voice hardened. Whether that rises to formal charges against anyone is a decision for this body, not for me. But pretending it was simple suicide is willful blindness. The debate that followed was heated but inconclusive. Without direct evidence linking Verea or anyone specific to the poisoning, there was no basis for charges. But the suspicion was now official record, documented and undeniable. People would remember this, the prisoner who died too conveniently, the investigation that found evidence of professional murder, the woman who benefited most from the silence. After the session adjourned, Edward pulled Morel aside. That was good work by Cortez, but it's not enough to remove her. I know, but it's another piece of the pattern. People are starting to see what she is, even if they can't prove it legally. Morel watched Verea across the room, speaking quietly with Vane and two other supporters. She's losing ground, slowly but steadily. She's also getting desperate. That makes her dangerous. She's always been dangerous. Now she's just more obvious about it. Over the following weeks, Morel worked to consolidate the changes she'd fought for. The Oversight Council met regularly, reviewing decisions and establishing precedents. Trade improved as security measures took hold. Pirate attacks dropped sharply once the new protocols made it impossible to predict shipping movements. Infrastructure projects moved forward. Diplomatic relationships strengthened. But Verea remained operating in the margins, building relationships where she could, looking for openings to exploit. Then Thomas brought Morel news that changed everything. We've identified the northern contact. His voice was tight with suppressed excitement. The person who was feeding information to the raiders. We know who it is. Morel looked up from the ledger she'd been reviewing. Who? Peter, the clerk in Brennan's trading house. We've been watching him like you ordered, tracking his movements and communications. He made a mistake 3 days ago, met with someone in a tavern, and didn't realize one of our people was there. They discussed payment schedules and information exchange. We have testimony. Is it solid? Solid enough to bring before the council. And Your Grace, when we arrested Peter this morning, he broke almost immediately, started talking about how he was recruited, how the payments worked, who his contacts were. Thomas's expression was fierce. He confirmed that Verea's people approached him 2 years ago. They'd been paying him to provide shipping schedules, cargo manifests, route changes, everything the raiders needed. Morel felt her pulse quicken. Will he testify? He's terrified. He knows what happened to Thorne, but we've offered him protection and leniency in exchange for cooperation. He's agreed. Thomas paused. Your Grace, this is it. This is the direct proof we've been looking for. A living witness who can connect Verea to the raids with specific details and documentation. When's the next council meeting? 2 days. Move it up. Tomorrow. And Thomas, security on Peter is absolute. Multiple guards, no access for anyone outside designated personnel, constant observation. If something happens to him like it did to Thorne, I understand. We won't lose this one. The emergency council session was called for the following afternoon. Morel spent the morning preparing, reviewing Peter's testimony, coordinating with Cortez and Thomas, making sure every detail was documented and verified. This was the confrontation she'd been building toward for months. It had to work. The council chamber filled early, people sensing that something significant was happening. Verea arrived with her usual delegation, but Morel noticed something different in her posture. Tension, wariness, the look of someone preparing for battle. She knows, Morel thought. Someone must have warned her. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Morel began. We have new evidence regarding the organized attacks on coastal shipping, specifically, evidence identifying the person who was providing inside information to the raiders. She gestured to Thomas, who brought in Peter. The young clerk looked terrified, his face pale and hands shaking, but he walked to the front of the chamber and stood there, surrounded by guards. State your name and position, Morel said gently. Peter Moss, I was a senior clerk at Brennan Trading House. His voice was barely audible. And what did your position entail? Managing shipping schedules, coordinating cargo manifests, tracking route changes and weather delays. I had access to all commercial information flowing through the house. And did you share that information with anyone outside the trading house? Peter's voice broke slightly. Yes. I was approached 2 years ago by a man named Kellis. He said he worked for merchant interests that wanted early information about shipping movements, claimed it was for legitimate business purposes. He offered me money, good money, more than I was making as a clerk. How much? 5 gold pieces per month, plus bonuses for particularly valuable information. A murmur ran through the council. 5 gold pieces was serious money, enough to live well, enough to compromise ethics for. And did Kellis tell you who he worked for? Morel kept her voice calm, letting Peter's testimony build naturally. Not at first, but after a few months he introduced me to his superior, a woman named... Peter stopped, swallowing hard. Take your time, Morel said. Lady Verea Santon. The name came out in a rush. She explained that she was building a commercial network that could operate more efficiently than existing structures. She said the information I was providing helped her make strategic investments, time her contracts better. She made it sound legitimate. When did you realize it wasn't legitimate? When the raid started matching the schedules I'd been providing. Ships I'd reported would be carrying valuable cargo got hit. Routes I'd said would be lightly guarded got attacked. At first I thought it was coincidence, but the pattern was too consistent. Peter's voice was stronger now, anger replacing fear. I confronted Kellis. He said I was already in too deep to stop, that if I went to authorities, they'd arrest me for conspiracy. So I kept providing information and tried not to think about what was happening. Verea stood, her voice cutting across the chamber. This is absurd. A clerk caught selling secrets invents a story to reduce his sentence, and we're supposed to believe it. I have documentation, Peter said, his voice shaking again but determined. Payment records showing deposits from accounts linked to Lady Verea's businesses. Letters from Kellis discussing specific information requests. Meeting notes where she personally asked me about particular ships and routes. He looked at Thomas, who brought forward a box of documents. It's all here, everything. The council erupted, people demanding to see the documents, shouting questions, arguing about credibility and motivation. Morel let it continue for a minute, then raised her hand for quiet. The documents are available for examination. I suggest we take time to review them thoroughly before making any decisions. She looked at Verea. Lady Verea, you're welcome to present a defense or explanation. Verea's expression was cold now, all pretense of friendliness gone. I don't recognize this clerk. I've never met him. These supposed documents are fabrications, just like the evidence against Marcus Thorne was fabricated. You're so desperate to destroy me that you're willing to believe any story, no matter how implausible. Then explain the payment records, Lady Thorne said, holding up one of the documents. These show transfers from an account registered to Santon Commercial Ventures to an account held by Peter Moss. Regular monthly payments for 2 years. My business has hundreds of employees and contractors. I can't personally verify every payment. Verea's voice was smooth despite the pressure. Someone in my organization may have hired this man for legitimate purposes. That doesn't mean I knew about any criminal activity. The letters are signed by you, Edward countered, examining another document. Unless you're claiming someone forged your signature for 2 years without you noticing. I sign dozens of letters every week. If someone wanted to use my name for their own purposes, stop. Morel's voice cut through the argument. Just stop, Verea. We all know what you are. We all know what you've been doing. These documents prove it. Peter's testimony confirms it. The only question now is what this council does about it. Verea's mask finally cracked completely, showing the calculation and fury underneath. What I am. What I've been doing. I've been building something real while you've been playing at governance with authority you didn't earn. Your husband gave you a title, and you think that makes you competent. It doesn't. You've spent 7 years maintaining systems someone else built. I've been creating new ones. By attacking ships and destroying livelihoods. By disrupting comfortable monopolies and creating opportunities for people willing to take risks. Verea's voice rose. You talk about stability like it's virtue. But stability just means protecting people who already have power. I was offering something different, a chance for new players to succeed, for different approaches to commercial relationships. You were offering chaos and calling it innovation, Morel shot back, and you were funding it through piracy and murder. I was funding it through strategic disruption. If some people lost cargo, if some established houses suffered setbacks. That's how markets work. Creative destruction, Morel. Maybe you'd understand it if you'd ever built something yourself, instead of just managing what your husband abandoned. The words hit harder than Morel expected, touching something raw. But she forced herself to stay calm. I've built plenty, including the coalition that's about to remove you from any influence in this region. You think you can remove me? I have support across Silverton, relationships with dozens of trading houses, connections you can't match. Verea's smile was sharp. You won this round, congratulations. But I'm not finished. You haven't seen the last of me. Actually, Lord Brennan said, his voice cold, I think we have. Based on the evidence presented, I'm moving that the council vote to ban Lady Verea from conducting business in Coastmarch territories and to freeze all assets connected to her commercial ventures pending investigation into illegal activities. I second that motion, Lady Thorne said immediately. The vote was quick and decisive. 20 votes in favor, 3 abstentions, none opposed. Verea stood there, visibly struggling to maintain composure as her influence evaporated in minutes. This isn't legal, she said, her voice tight. You can't simply seize assets without... We're not seizing them. We're freezing them pending legal investigation. Standard procedure when criminal activity is suspected. Edward's tone was almost sympathetic. You're welcome to appeal through proper channels, Lady Verea. I'm sure it will be handled with all the speed and fairness that such processes typically involve, which meant months or years of legal wrangling, her resources tied up, her operations paralyzed. Morel saw Verea realize this, saw the calculation behind her eyes as she assessed options and found none that worked. I want my testimony on record, Verea said finally. I deny all accusations. I've operated legally and ethically throughout my time in this region. If corrupt officials have fabricated evidence to eliminate a political rival, that's a statement about their character, not mine. Noted, Morel said. Anything else? Verea looked at her for a long moment. You've won this, Morel, but you should ask yourself what you've actually accomplished. You've removed someone offering alternatives, destroyed innovation, protected the same old comfortable systems. Is that really governance, or is it just fear of change? It's protecting people from someone who is willing to hurt them for profit. Call it whatever you want. Morel's voice was steady. You're done here, Verea. Leave Coastmarch, go back to Silverton, or go somewhere else entirely. But you're finished operating in my territory. For just a moment, something like respect flickered in Verea's expression. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. She turned and walked out, her delegation following in uncomfortable silence. The chamber erupted in conversation the moment she left. People processing what had just happened, discussing implications, already positioning themselves for whatever came next. Morel let them talk, feeling exhaustion wash over her. Edward appeared at her elbow. You did it. You actually got her. We got her. The council, the evidence, Peter's testimony, it was all of us. Morel rubbed her eyes. But it doesn't feel like I thought it would. What did you think it would feel like? Triumphant, maybe. Vindicated. Instead, I just feel tired. She looked at Edward. She's right about one thing. I did spend years maintaining systems someone else built. I've been reactive more than innovative. Maybe that makes me exactly what she said, competent but unimaginative. Or maybe it makes you careful, which is what this coast needed after 7 years of neglect. Edward's voice was gentle. Don't let her poison your victory, Morel. You've earned this. The weeks that followed brought a strange kind of peace. With Verea gone and her network disrupted, the pirate raids stopped almost entirely. Commerce stabilized. The Oversight Council established rhythms and procedures, becoming less experimental and more functional. Morel found herself actually able to sleep through the night for the first time in months. But something still felt unresolved. It crystallized one evening when Isla brought her another letter from Cedric. She'd been receiving them periodically, brief, awkward notes that danced around actual communication. This one was different. Morel, I've been thinking about what you said when I was last in Coast March. About how I abandoned my responsibilities. About how you built something in the space I left empty. I've been angry about that, if I'm honest. Angry that you made it sound like I was useless, like nothing I did mattered. But I've also been watching what you've accomplished. The Oversight Council, the security improvements, the way you handled the Verea situation. And I'm starting to realize something uncomfortable. You're better at this than I ever was. Not just competent, better. I don't know what that means for us. Our marriage has been dead for years. We both know that. But maybe it means something for how we structure the duchy going forward. You've proven you can govern Coast March effectively. Maybe it's time to make that official and permanent, not just delegated authority that I could theoretically revoke. I'm proposing a formal division of responsibilities. You take coastal territories with full ducal authority, not as my representative, but as duke in your own right for that region. I'll manage Silverton and the inland holdings. We maintain the marriage legally for succession purposes, but we govern independently. It's not romantic, but it's honest, and maybe that's better than what we've had. Let me know what you think, Cedric. Morel read the letter 3 times, trying to process what it actually meant. Cedric offering to give up half his duchy wasn't something she'd imagined possible. It suggested either remarkable growth on his part or remarkable pressure from people around him who recognized reality. Probably both, she thought. Your Grace? Isla's voice was tentative. Is it good news or bad? I'm not sure yet. Morel folded the letter carefully. He's offering me what I've effectively had for years, authority over the coast, but making it official, permanent, independent of him. That's good, isn't it? It should be. But it also means accepting that the marriage is really over. Not in practice, it's been over for years, but making it official, public, permanent. Morel felt something twist in her chest. I thought I'd be ready for that. I'm not sure I am. Because you still love him? No. Because I still remember loving him, and letting go of that memory feels like losing something important. Morel stood, walking to the window that overlooked the harbor. When I married Cedric, I had all these ideas about what our life would be, partnership, shared purpose, building something together. None of that happened, but I held on to the possibility of it for longer than I should have. And now you're letting go completely. Now I'm accepting what actually is instead of what might have been. Morel's voice was quiet, which is apparently harder than fighting off conspiracies and economic warfare. She spent the next few days thinking about Cedric's proposal, examining it from every angle. The practical benefits were obvious: formal authority, no more ambiguity about her role, freedom to govern without worrying about him revoking her mandate. But it also meant publicly acknowledging failure, accepting that they'd never be what they'd promised each other 15 years ago. Finally, she wrote back, Cedric, I accept your proposal. The formal division makes sense given how we've been operating anyway. I'll have legal documents drawn up establishing the coastal territories as an independent duchy under my authority, with you retaining the inland holdings. We can maintain the marriage legally for succession purposes as you suggested. Thank you for recognizing what needed to happen. I know this isn't what either of us expected when we got married, but sometimes the best we can do is acknowledge reality and work with what we have rather than what we hoped for. Take care of yourself. And Cedric, for what it's worth, I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for. I don't think it was Verea, and I know it wasn't me, but maybe you'll figure it out eventually. Morel. 3 months later, official documents arrived bearing the king's seal. Duchess Morel of Coastmarch with full ducal authority independent of the inland territories. It came with ceremony and formal recognition, witnesses and legal proceedings that made everything binding and permanent. Morel stood in the great hall, surrounded by people who'd worked with her for years, and accepted the formal title that legitimized what she'd already been doing. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like closing a chapter. Necessary, right? But tinged with sadness for what that chapter had never become. After the ceremony, she retreated to the cliffs where she'd stood so many times before, looking out at water that never stopped moving. Edward found her there, as she'd half expected he would. "Duchess," he said, and there was warmth in the title now. "How does official authority feel?" "Heavy, permanent, a little lonely." Morel glanced at him. "Is that normal?" "I think so. You've been fighting for this for so long that actually having it feels strange. Give it time." Edward stood beside her, both of them watching the ocean. "What are you going to do now?" "Everything I've been doing, just with less ambiguity about my right to do it." Morel smiled slightly. "The Oversight Council still needs work. We've got infrastructure projects that need funding. The Northern Fishing Guilds are arguing about territorial waters again. There's always something." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Morel was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to build something. Not maintain, not manage. Actually build. New trade routes, better harbor facilities, maybe a proper naval academy, so we're not always scrambling to train competent officers. Things that outlast me, that matter beyond immediate crisis management." "That sounds like the beginning of something real." "I hope so. Because if the last 7 years taught me anything, it's that survival isn't enough. You have to actually create something worth surviving for." She paused. "And Edward, thank you. For supporting me when you could have stayed neutral. For pushing me when I needed it. For being honest even when it was uncomfortable. You made it easy. You were always worth supporting, Morel. You just needed to believe that yourself." After Edward left, Morel stayed on the cliffs until the sun set, painting the ocean in colors that shifted too quickly to name. She thought about Cedric, probably in Silverton, with whatever new companion had replaced Verea. She thought about Verea herself, somewhere plotting her next scheme, or maybe finally accepting defeat. She thought about the 15 years since she'd married a duke and imagined a partnership that never materialized. And she thought about the future, her future, not defined by who she'd married or what she'd inherited, but by what she'd built through years of work that nobody had particularly noticed until it became impossible to ignore. The Oversight Council convened the following week for routine business. Morel opened the session, reviewed proposals, mediated disagreements, made decisions. Boring governance, the kind that kept territories functioning. But there was satisfaction in it now, not the desperate satisfaction of proving herself, but the quiet satisfaction of doing work that mattered. Halfway through the session, a messenger arrived with news. A merchant convoy from the Southern Territories wanted to establish new trade relationships with Coast March, citing the region's reputation for stability and fair dealing. They were requesting formal negotiations. "Duchess, should we arrange a delegation?" Thomas asked. Morel considered. "Set up initial meetings. But I want representatives from the fishing guilds and the textile manufacturers included, not just traditional merchant houses. If we're establishing new relationships, we do it with input from everyone who will be affected." She saw approval on faces around the council table. This was what they'd built together, a system where power was distributed, where decisions involved multiple perspectives, where no single person could control everything. It wasn't perfect. People still argued, still pursued self-interest, still made mistakes, but it was functional in ways that personal authority never could be. After the session, Lady Thorne approached Morel privately. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her normally stern expression softening slightly, "for handling the situation with my nephew the way you did. You could have used his crimes to discredit me, to force me into supporting you out of fear. You didn't. You were never the problem, Helen. Marcus made his own choices." Morel paused. "What happened to him? The investigation never concluded definitively, but we both know it wasn't suicide." "I know, and I know who is responsible, even without proof." Thorne's voice was hard. "Verea took something from me when she had him killed. Not love. I'd given up on Marcus years ago. But the possibility of redemption, of him maybe becoming something better. She took that because it was convenient. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just make sure what you're building here, this council, this system, make sure it's strong enough that people like her can't operate the way she did. That's the best justice for Marcus. Not revenge, but prevention. Morel thought about that conversation for days afterward. Prevention rather than revenge. Building systems rather than just punishing individuals. It was a different way of thinking about justice, less emotionally satisfying, but probably more effective. 6 months after becoming Duke in her own right, Morel stood in front of the partially completed Naval Academy and watched workers lay foundation stones for the central building. It would take years to finish, would cost more than she wanted to spend, and would probably face endless complications and setbacks. But it would exist. A permanent institution for training competent naval officers, for building expertise that didn't depend on finding rare, talented individuals. Something that would outlast her, that would keep functioning whether she was brilliant or mediocre, present or absent. Cortez approached, reviewing architectural plans. "The design is ambitious, Your Grace. Are you sure about the expense?" "No, but I'm sure about the need." Morel looked at the foundation taking shape. "We've been lucky with you. You're competent and dedicated, but we can't rely on luck. We need systems that produce competence reliably." Spoken like someone who's learned that lesson the hard way. 7 years of hard lessons. I'm a slow learner, apparently, but I get there eventually. That evening, Morel hosted a small dinner in the fortress. Nothing formal, just Edward, Lady Thorne, Cortez, Thomas, and Isla. People who'd been there through the worst of it, who'd seen her barely holding together and hadn't turned away. "To the Duke," Edward said, raising his glass. "May her governance be long, boring, and remarkably free of attempted coups and murder plots." "I'll drink to boring," Morel agreed. "I've had enough excitement for one lifetime." "You say that now," Thorne said dryly, "but give it a year or two and you'll be looking for the next crisis to solve." "Maybe, but hopefully on my own terms rather than reacting to someone else's schemes." Morel sipped her wine. "Speaking of which, has anyone heard what happened to Verea after she left?" "Last I heard, she was in the Eastern Territories trying to establish new commercial networks," Cortez said. "Apparently not very successfully. Turns out her reputation preceded her." "Good." Morel felt no triumph saying it, just quiet satisfaction. "I don't wish her harm, but I don't wish her success either. Preferably she just fades into irrelevance somewhere far from here." "Do you think she will fade into irrelevance?" Isla's question was tentative. "Honestly, probably not. She's too ambitious, too clever, too unwilling to accept defeat." Morel set down her glass. "But that's her problem now, not mine. I've got a duchy to run and an academy to build. I don't have energy left for old enemies." The conversation shifted to lighter topics. Gossip about trading house politics, speculation about weather patterns affecting the fishing season, Edward's ongoing attempts to convince his daughter to take over his business instead of running off to be a ship captain. Normal life, the kind Morel hadn't had time for in years. Later, after everyone had left and the fortress had settled into nighttime quiet, Morel stood alone in what had once been Cedric's office and was now definitively hers. She'd redecorated minimally, removed his few remaining possessions, brought in her own books and papers, made it a space that reflected who she actually was, rather than who she'd been expected to be. On her desk sat the letter from Cedric formalizing their arrangement, the King's seal legitimizing her authority, and a recent report from the Oversight Council showing improved trade statistics and declining security incidents. Physical evidence of what she'd built. But what mattered more was what she felt looking at those documents. Not vindication, not triumph, just the quiet certainty that she was doing work that needed doing, and doing it well enough to make a difference. 7 years ago, she'd stood on the cliffs and watched for ships that never came, waiting for a husband who'd decided other things were more important than coming home. She'd felt small then, insignificant, like a placeholder in someone else's story. Now she stood in her own office, in her own duchy, with her own authority earned through years of competent governance. And she didn't feel small anymore. The ocean outside kept moving, kept crashing against cliffs that had stood for centuries and would stand for centuries more. The wind kept blowing. The territory kept functioning, and Morel kept working, not because she was waiting for something to change or someone to come back, but because this was her work now, her responsibility, her purpose. She'd learned, finally, that power didn't come from titles or marriages or what other people gave you. It came from showing up every day and doing the work that needed doing, whether anyone noticed or not. From building systems that outlasted individual ambitions. From choosing substance over performance, prevention over revenge, long-term stability over short-term triumph. It wasn't the story she'd imagined when she married Cedric 15 years ago, but it was the one she'd built anyway, through 7 years of survival and struggle, and refusing to break when breaking would have been easier. And standing there in the darkness, looking out at an ocean that never stopped moving, Morel realized she wouldn't trade this ending for the one she'd originally imagined. Because that imagined ending had required her to stay small, to define herself through someone else, to wait for permission to be significant. This ending, this reality she'd built from necessity and determination, required her to be large enough to hold everything together when it was falling apart. To stand alone when standing together wasn't possible. To become someone who didn't need rescue because she'd learned to rescue herself. The cliffs stood. The ocean moved. And Morel, Duke of Coastmarch, turned away from the window and back to the work that would continue tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond. Unglamorous, essential, hers. She'd stopped waiting for ships to return years ago. Now she was the one building the harbor that ships would navigate toward, the lighthouse that guided them safely home. Not through inherited authority or granted permission, but through 7 years of proving that survival belonged to those who led when leadership was needed, whether anyone had asked them to or not. And that finally was enough.